why don't we begin? Uh, Valerie, welcome to the call, and Jason and Josh, welcome. Uh, and to those of you who are the regulars, of course, you're always welcome, and we know each other well by this point. We are. This is our, in theory, this is our millennia in microcosm philosophy seminar that's been going on for 5 or 6 years. But in practice, we're in an interlude, and the interlude is about the position of Aristoi in the modern world, based on Kenneth Smith's paper, Human Nature's Greek Philosophical Anthropology. And the connection between the two is that Greek philosophical anthropology explains some things about how the ancient world saw people, some important things. And in the chapter about the ancient world in Millennium Microcosm, Kenneth just kind of breezes past this part. He mentions it briefly. There's not enough room because he's trying to cover the entire ancient world in a single chapter. And perhaps this paper ought to be put into that book as a second chapter about the ancient world, because this is where Kenneth really talks about his concept of the three character types that he drew from the Greeks, from Hannah Arendt, from Nietzsche and others. So it's a really important part of understanding the ancient perspective, and that's why we're doing this deep dive. We have, in past weeks, we've gotten through the abstract, some prefatory cautions, and the intro. And then we got one paragraph into the main body, the section about Greek philosophical anthropology. And then we got a bunch of new folks. And so the last several sessions have been focused on bringing people up to speed and talking about where things are at. And for those of you who are new today, feel free at any point to ask us to explain things. We talk about something you haven't heard before. Don't let the fact that we're just breezing along intimidate you into thinking, "Oh, I shouldn't say anything." This is for the people who are present. You're present, so this 3 hours is for you. And if there's things you want to hear, if there's things you're curious about, if there's things you don't understand, just ask, just interrupt, just put your hand. We use the hands method here. Just stick your hand up. We're using the react, the little react button at the bottom, and we'll call on you. So in general, I hadn't planned to do an introductory thing, but I'll do a brief one. And then the main thing I want to do today is the last paragraph of the intro. Let me actually, let me share this paper. Why don't I do that first? Put this here, Old World Principles. There it is. Greek Philosophical Anthropology. Bam. Uploading. Okay, there it is. So that's the PDF of the paper that we're going through. And you feel free to, download a copy, review it. As David said, the recordings are available online through his YouTube channel, where we've discussed kind of up to the present. And where we are is we are backing up to the last paragraph of the introduction. And I'll talk about why we're doing that in a moment. First, here's the outline of the paper, again, in the chat for anyone who's kind of looking for some context. We're backing up to paragraph 15. And we're backing up to paragraph 15 because it must be almost a month ago now, Stephen asked a very interesting question, and we haven't yet addressed it. Stephen, for those of you who don't know Stephen, one of the things that Stephen does is he saves up some very interesting question or comment to right before we're due to end, and then he drops it on us. And then we're all like, "Oh God, we need an hour to talk about that, and it's time for us to hang up and go home." And so it's like a test. Can we remember from one week to the next what we were talking about the previous week? So I've been thinking about what Stephen said, and I did a deep dive, kind of investigating it. Stephen's question: we're talking about the three basic character types according to the Greeks, and the three types, which I'll put in the chat again, are douloi, banausoi, and Aristoi. Those are the plural forms of the nouns. The singular forms are doulos, banausos, and Aristos. Greek means lots and lots of inflections, not just conjugating verbs, but inflecting your nouns and your adjectives and everything else. Latin does it far more than any other Western European contemporary language, and Greek does it so much it makes Latin look like it's not doing it at all. So you'll see lots and lots of words derived from these terms with different endings. We'll talk about banausea. We'll talk about things that are eristic. Don't let that dissuade you. It's just that they've got a lot of endings and a lot of inflections. So the character types they thought of these sort of like this, kind of domestic slaves. These corresponded to realms of the economy. So domestic slaves, and then craftsmen and merchants, and then finally the political class, which we might say those in governments.
So my position was that each person must have the free qualities within them somewhere. There must be a seed of the Aristoi in each person, even if it's very undeveloped. I'm saying to some degree, it's not an absolute fate. It's a choice, because to become an Aristoi would require a lot of effort,
Yes.
a lot of heart-rending effort. That's the whole point, that you have to think outside the box. The Banausoi will think, but only inside the box. The Dualoi won't think much at all, which is a really great place to be, if you ask me, because the important thing in life is satisfying all your immediate desires without thought for any consequences.
It's a great question, and the context that Stephen raised it in was, if you have Kenneth, the whole framework of this interregnum is this idea that Ari asked a question because of an offhand comment I made about something that Kenneth said about the modern world. That's what started the interregnum, and the question that Ari asked was this: Kenneth Smith says that one of the ways that you can describe the modern world as opposed to the ancient or medieval world is that, unlike the other two, this epoch is in a war. It's committing characterological genocide against one of the character types. It's attempting to utterly eliminate Aristoi and to reduce the world to just Douloi and Banausoi, and try to make a world that's only governed in those two ways, and in which there is no place in society for people who play the role that the Aristoi played in ancient Greece. And Ari said, well, you can't just say something like that. That's too interesting. We have to explore what it means. What are you talking about? Why does Kenneth say this? What does it all mean? And that's what led us to this paper. We also have a big collection of quotations from all over Kenneth Smith's writing that David Royal searched out, and I'll be interspersing those in future weeks as well. So the question that Stephen raised is, if it were true, hypothetically, and not granting that it is, but just if hypothetically it were true that the modern world has exterminated all or most Aristoi, if the only Aristoi we have are damaged specimens who can't play their role, then and if the role of if the Greeks were right that the role of Aristoi is essential as culture bearers, as people who question the system and modify the system to make it work better, to try to shape culture, shape religion, shape the economy. If that's all true, then what does that mean in a condition like ours, where ostensibly there aren't any Aristoi? Now what? What happens if those functions aren't being played? And Stephen wondered. He said, could it be that in the absence of Aristoi, Douloi and Banausoi would spontaneously mature or develop to fill in the missing role so that our species can survive? Is that possible? Would that take place? And I had to think about it for a while. And then I did a lot of reading in Hannah Arendt and Aristotle, two of the sources that Kenneth Smith draws on for these things, to try to answer his question. So that's what we want to talk about today, and maybe the next week or two, is these issues. They're raised by paragraph 15. That's when Stephen brought it up, and it goes to the heart of what are these three character types and how do they function. So let's kind of wrap up our little summary of the types to get started here. So one of the things that we've talked about is that these three, according to Aristotle, and he says this subtly. There's no single quote where he says it, but if you read his stuff on ethics and politics, it becomes clear this is what he means. That the Douloi, Banausoi, and Aristoi started out as political economic roles in Greek society. The Greek ancestors were a warrior tribe. They invaded and conquered the I guess you could call it a peninsula that the Greeks inhabit, and they enslaved the indigenous people who lived there and made them work for them, and so they ended up with two castes. And then over time, as the craftsman merchant professions arose among the Greek society, they became skeptical about those people's ability to make good governance decisions. And so they not only deprived the vote of domestic slaves, agricultural slaves, they also deprived the vote from craftsmen and merchants, and said they too should not vote. And so originally these are roles, and as always happens in societies, whenever people have a role that they happen to be on top and everybody else is underneath, they can think of a million reasons why this is just and good. Of course, I'm the best. Of course, I'm the brightest. We have a meritocracy. I didn't enslave them. They enslaved themselves. I just happen to be that good. I deserve to be on top. This is the sort of, trivial rationalizations that, well, we do to this day, right? Why are some people poor? Why are some people rich? Capitalism must be a meritocracy. The cream floats to the top. Nothing else could ever possibly float to the top, and the people at the bottom must deserve it. I mean, you've heard these arguments 1,000 times in your life. And in the 19th century and 18th century, they used to just say it flat out in a far more open way than we do today. So Aristotle said the Greeks did that. They justified their position of rulership over who they considered to be their inferiors. And they made up excuses about why those people underneath us are so bad. What are their bad qualities that justify? Why did they justify it? Their ancestors didn't. Their ancestors said, well, it's the sword or kneel. Either you submit or you die. And so people submitted. And they said, well, we win because we're the biggest badasses. That's why we rule. But this thing happens. I mean, Hollywood can be full of people who don't seem to have any problem with, obey because I'm the best, I'm the king. We see the macho man type explained or depicted a lot in Hollywood films. But what do you tell your children who are not macho men yet? Some of them are never going to be macho men, but you like them anyway. They're your kids. How do you explain to them why that slave over there who they're friends with deserves to be a slave and why you deserve to be free? So over the course of multiple generations, multiple centuries, the Greeks did what all societies end up doing once they become semi-stable, which is they began searching for something that could justify the status quo. They began investigating human character. And this is why Kenneth calls subtitles this thing Greek philosophical anthropology. They're like, what kind of people would deserve to be slaves? What kind of people would deserve to rule? What happens? What kind of people could be craftsmen and merchants? What does it do to the way you see the world? What does it do to your empathy? What does it do to your ability to wield power and to govern? All of these different questions. They began really digging into them over the course of a long period of time. And according to Aristotle, they came up with really good justifications for who should be a slave. What is a slavish type? They found it in human nature. And they said there are people who have a kind of slavish personality, just like there are people who have a calculating, learning, social climbing, logical, analytical character type, personality. And there are other people who come to understand that both of those alternatives are traps. That if you live your entire life based on this here now, what I feel, what I smell, it makes you parochial. You're too centered in your own life. You're not thinking about the larger picture. You can't govern because your own appetites, your desires, and the feelings you have if you're enraged in a moment. If you're in a position of governance and you act on that rage, if you don't leash your emotions, then you'll act on them and do things that you later regret. They talked a lot about this. This is why they didn't want the douloi to be in a position of governance. They wanted them to have a role in society where they could do the things that fit their nature. But they said they also didn't want to be ruled by banausoi, that way of life in which you think, well, I've got a theory and my theory says this is what you do, right? Like the law is a theory. People who cross against the light deserve this fine. People who speed deserve that other fine. People who steal under these conditions, like robbing when people aren't home, well, that's worse than jaywalking or speeding, but it's not as bad as people who rob at a knife point or a gun point. That's worse. And so you construct this whole system that defines the real world in terms of these abstract definitions and categories. And thus you get the legal system, police officers, you get lawyers and judges. And they said similarly, it works the same with craftsmanship. Donald and I were both programmers, right? And programming is all about learning a great deal about the material that you're trying to handle. You have to learn how the computer behaves. You have to learn a language, formal language that human beings couldn't use to express most things, but you can use to tell a computer what you expect it to do next. Store this data over there. If this is not a number, well, that's bad. I need you to write to the user and say, hey, this is not what I asked you to put in. I was looking for somebody's name and I don't expect to see 47. You learn this kind of technical, schematizing, jargon-oriented, but very precise language to manipulate the situation. And this is, as the Greeks observed, analogous to what a lawyer does. They've got their categories of crimes, a very precise jargon and language arises. Same thing carpenters do, same thing that merchants and accountants do. They develop these insular jargons and they see the world in terms, they interpret the world in terms of these specialized, formalizing, logical mathematical languages. And the Greeks said, and Hegel said, and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, Arendt and Kenneth Smith, they all talk about the fact that the more you do that sort of thing, the greater the danger that you're going to treat the actual real world as though it is the land of theory that you're so proficient with. After all, you're really good at dealing with things in these abstract terms that you've learned and mastered. You've risen in your craft. Maybe you're a journeyman. Maybe you're a master. You really have command of these formalizations. It's the man with the hammer problem, to whom every problem starts to look like a nail. To the police officer, everything looks like a crime. Right? That's what he's learned. Which crime are you committing now? What kind of criminal are you? But if your background isn't law and order, if it's programming, you might start thinking in terms of abstractions. What type are you? What category do you fit in? What algorithm are you following in your life? And so on. So when people do this, it creates enormous danger, as the 20th century illustrated. We may wish in hindsight that Nazism, for example, was an irrational, anger-driven behavior. But as Hannah Arendt persuasively argues, it was quite the opposite. Why was everybody so disappointed in Eichmann at his trial? They wanted to see a monster frothing at the mouth, screaming about the Jews, and instead they get a guy who says, well, I don't have anything against the Jews. I tried to help them find a homeland somewhere else. And, it was well documented in the trial that he did try to find them a homeland somewhere else. And he did work with Zionists to export lots of Jews to Palestine. He did all these things, which doesn't make sense if, he's a raving, I just hate the Jews and I need to kill them all and I wish they would all burn and die. But that was the image we had. We thought only a devil could do something like this. We have interpreted the idea that all bad things come from irrationality and strong feelings. We really couldn't handle the idea that what we have here is a bureaucrat, a middle management bureaucrat who has his rules and his ideas and he's following orders. And when the orders change from, okay, we're no longer going to try to solve the Jewish problem by exporting people, we're now going to solve it by sending them to rehabilitation camps. So maybe they're not rehabilitation. Maybe they're concentration camps. Okay, maybe they're not concentration. Maybe they're death camps. He just followed those orders as efficiently as he'd followed the previous orders. Because obeying the system, being a gear in the machine, doing what's expected, looking at the world through the lenses that you've mastered, this is what the hyper-intellectual does. It's the danger of hyper-intellectualism. You want intellectualism with a heart. You want intellectualism that's tied to empirical evidence, that pays attention to what's really going on. So you don't even need this analysis from Arendt. The Greeks themselves, Aristotle himself says, the problem with people who are full-time merchants is that they forget that the purpose of trade is friendship. They start to think that the purpose of trade is to win, to get as much as you can. And that was why they denied the vote. They said these people shouldn't govern us because they don't really see us anyway. They just see customers, producers, voters, fans, patients, criminals. They see these categories that they've memorized and mastered. What they don't see is the actual person in front of them, which means that they can't govern. Yeah, Stephen's right. Arendt also talks about what Stalinism did in the same way, to get rid of the dead classes. That was one of the things Stalin wouldn't stop talking about. So we'll come back to Eichmann in more detail later, but the point is to illustrate these types. And what defines the heuristic type is that the heuristic type is skeptical of the parochial life of living entirely for today, in the moment, based solely on your feelings and what you're sensing and experiencing. But they're also skeptical of the hyper-intellectual who wants to live a life of theory, who wants to treat the world as though it is the theory that he's gotten so good at. So both of these are menaces. They're menaces. They cause different kinds of catastrophes. A doulos at his worst might become a serial killer. Nabanalsos at his worst might design a Holocaust. So they have different levels of reach because of the different levels of proficiency that they've acquired, but they're in different kinds of traps. One is in a hyper-emotional, experiential trap. The other's in a hyper-intellectual, theoretical trap. So the definition of the Aristoi, and this is why I'm belaboring this. It takes a little bit to pin down, and then we'll be done with our intro and be ready to go into depth. The defining characteristic of the Aristoi, according to this, is that they see both of these traps and they refuse to be ruled by either of these faculties that we all have. We all have the capacity to plug ourselves into experience and feel deeply, and to see deeply, to hear deeply, to be plugged into the flow of experience. We all have it. We're born that way. That's how we know we all have it. Every baby is a doulos turned up to 11. It's maximized. But we also all have the capacity to intellectualize, to learn things. We learn languages, right? Um, we have the capacity to learn mathematics and logic. We have the capacity to learn a trade, especially in the modern world, which is a hyper-banausic world. Everybody ends up learning how to do their taxes, how to follow the rules of the road. I mean, we are massively banausified. But of course, the problem is that the Aristos looks at that and says that's just like having feelings, just like being plugged into experience. In the same way, being able to hyper intellectualize and learn a lot of things and follow systems is necessary but not sufficient. It makes that faculty in us makes a good servant, just like the ability to smell and see and to feel anger makes a good servant, but it does not make a good master. It makes a terrible master because, as Hegel says, to abstract is to be in error. Every act of abstraction, when we treat things like the abstract things that we need to plug into our programs or our legal systems or our economies, the moment we do that, we're losing an enormous amount of the picture. And the part that we've lost is where the injustice begins. So the Greeks said these people should not govern, not because they could govern and we're withholding it from them, but because they're characterologically incapable of governance. They would do something else and call it governance, right? The tyrant king who's a doulos, who one day is feeling happy and he showers gifts on his subjects, and the next day he's in a terrible mood and he starts whipping people. This is why you don't want somebody who lives in the emotional flow of experience of the moment to be in a position of rulership, because he can't govern, he can only rule. And in the same way, you don't want the Banausos to be in charge of you, the committee that decides what's right for everybody based on, we have a 5-year plan and there are only so many kinds of people in the world and we're going to treat them all in the following ways because the rules say so. That's terrible because so much of life is about exceptions to the rule. So, no two people are the same. We all have our differences, and to govern appropriately, those things have to be taken into account. You can't just uniformly slap out the same pattern over and over and over because it's what you've learned. So this is the background. These are the 3 types. And the way that we know Aristotle made this distinction between the political economic roles and the actual Greek philosophical anthropology that they discovered is that he makes the point, I think it's in the Politics, it might be in the Nicomachean Ethics. I didn't look it up for this call, but I've looked at it before. He says there is a problem in Greek society, and that is frequently you will find people who have been enslaved who are not douloi, people who've been enslaved who ought to be craftsmen or who ought to be governing us. And they were just enslaved through bad luck. They were on the road and some slave taker grabbed them as a free person and put shackles on them and made them function as a slave. And Aristotle says that is a double injustice. It's an injustice to the person because they're not going to be good at what you're making them do, and they're great at something you're not letting them do. And and they can't be happy like that. And it's an injustice to society because whatever the thing is that they were great at that they could have been doing, you're now withholding from society by treating this guy as a ditch digger. It's like if you would slave Mozart and make him dig ditches. He's going to be lousy at it. I mean, if you've seen Amadeus, which is granted fictional, but it gives you some sense of the guy's character. He's going to be lousy at that. But if you let him write music, he's going to give us masterpieces. It's like this is the thing that the guy can't. It's his drive. It's his excellence. He needs to do it, and you're punishing him by not letting him do that, and you're punishing society by depriving us of the great works of Mozart. And Aristotle said that is a huge problem in contemporary Greek society. He says there's a similar problem at the Banausic level, but let's just skip on ahead to the other end. There are people who are ruling us and in charge who we all call Aristoi who are nothing of the kind. There are people sitting on the governing councils of Athens who have a mind full of appetites. And that's terrible, because every time you do a vote, they're not voting for what's good for people, or they're not voting for what's best for Athens. They're voting for what's good for their stomach. It says, and that corrupts politics. It isn't even politics anymore, right? To be political, it would have to be capable of functioning at a governing level, not at an appetite level. And he says the same thing happens with Benausoi. You get these people in charge, and all they can think about is money. And the next thing you know, they're dragging Athens into the Peloponnesian War, and it's leading to a catastrophe and the fall of Athens. And eventually, this long series of civil wars that culminates in them being conquered by the hick hillbillies to the north, the Macedonians, which is how the Greeks thought of the Macedonians. And Aristotle saw all of this happen. He says this is what happens when you let merchants be in charge. They start thinking about, well, what decisions will make me the richest? And that's not based on certainty. There's an element of gambling. But now they're not gambling with their own fortune. They're gambling with the fate of the entire polis or the entire Greek world. So we know Aristotle made these distinctions. And in this paper, Kenneth absolutely makes these distinctions. So Kenneth is not trying to say that if you have been captured and put in shackles, that you are therefore a slave. Kenneth's, the philosopher kind of who we're working with here, he says, fundamentally, the actual political economy of the civilization in question is a whole separate problem from the question of what are the natures that come naturally to us? What are the kinds of characters that come naturally to us? And how can you organize a just society so that people can do the things that they want to do, that they're good at doing, and not try to force them to do things that they're terrible at and that they're not able to do. So these are the types. And so when he says that the modern world is defined in part as having committed characterological genocide against Aristoi, what he's saying is, in the modern world, there are roles for the administrators and there are roles from the workers, and there aren't any other roles. You can either own everything or you can be in debt to the people who own everything. But what you can't do in the modern world is say, I think this whole debt ownership thing is not working for us. We need to change the system. You do that and you end up in jail, or you end up in a mental institution, or you end up homeless, or you end up dead. There is so much money at stake. There's so much power involved, nuclear weapons, gigantic armies, that there is no way anymore. There's no role anymore for the people whose job it is to look deeply into the structures of society and figure out where we're going wrong and what has to be changed. And as a result, it means that what we call politics is just Duloi and Benausoi arm wrestling for whose itch gets scratched today. No one, almost no one, is actually thinking about what would give us a just society. And anyone who tries to do that gets in trouble with the law. So that's the background. This is, I know it's taken a half hour, but that's the background behind the conversation that we're about to have today. We're gonna dive in now. So here's paragraph 15. It's there in the PDF, but I'm also just gonna paste it right into the chat so we can look at it. This is the paragraph in question. And I'm gonna read it out, and then I'm gonna take us through. There are three big issues raised by this paragraph. The second one addresses Stephen's question. And I don't know if we can do it in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but we're going to go through this. So let's just review this. This is his culminating paragraph, the final paragraph of the introduction, setting up the main paper. And it draws on what came in the previous 14 paragraphs. And, we're not going to go through all those today. Feel free to look at them in the paper. But think of this paragraph as a summary. Also think about this paragraph as it's full of keywords that Kenneth defines in very specific ways. We don't want to just project onto it the definitions we're comfortable with, because then it's just a Rorschach test. If we want to understand what Kenneth's saying, we have to decode his use of keywords and terms. And that's why I'm going to take these 3 weeks doing this as an exercise in doing that. He says, how can notoriously impersonal and dehumanizing modern civilization be the child of forces of human personality? In other words, he's saying, how can this inhuman thing be human? How is it that the most human parts of us could be responsible for creating the Holocaust or the American tax system or what have you? He says, modern see only an invasion of naive psyche or community by alien schemes of abstract control, of profit and quantification. That is to say, when we can muster ourselves to criticize the inhuman qualities of this giant world system that we've built, we always treat it like some alien, inhuman thing has invaded a human space and pushed away our humanness to make room for its mechanical behavior. And he's implicitly criticizing that. He's saying, no, this mechanizing, alienating tendency to make everything into a giant machine is part of human nature. It is one of the weirdest things about Homo sapiens. No other animal has within its character a drive to destroy the things that make it comfortable. Cheetahs, every act a cheetah takes makes the Serengeti more appropriate for cheetahs, more healthy for cheetahs, a better place for cheetahs to live. But Homo sapiens has this tug of war going on between the experiential side of us and the abstractivizing side of us. And that abstractivizing side of us, when it gets the upper hand, can destroy the values that make life worth living. It can put petroleum into clean water. It can dump pollution into clean air. It can sell poisonous food and just use advertising and marketing to try to disguise it and make it seem tasty. For those who don't know, if you've never read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, you probably don't understand where all the food safety laws came from. But let me tell you, before there were food safety laws, the market did horrible, horrible, horrible things, like adding fiber to foods by putting sawdust in. What? It's fiber. Just because you can't digest it, why should you care? Technically they met the requirement. It was fiber. It was just non-dietary fiber. Another thing is they would sell rotten milk, but then they'd put chalk dust in it, and the chalk dust would re-whiten the milk and make it look like white milk. I could go on all day. Horrible, nasty things happened in the food industry, and it was under Teddy Roosevelt's administration that Upton Sinclair's The Jungle came out, and Teddy Roosevelt was reading it while he was enjoying his sausages for breakfast, and he had to spit them out and put them down and say, "How can I enjoy my breakfast if this horrible stuff is going on in the world? We absolutely have to leash these people to stop doing what they're doing." So
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Rick, I'm sorry, but what years did this happen? What years are we talking about?
it's the early 20th century. It's under the Teddy Roosevelt administration. You can look up. I'll just type in Upton Sinclair, The Jungle. It's a fictionalized narrative, but it's a fictionalized narrative based on what was actually happening in the food industry in the United States at the time. And that's why when Roosevelt investigated it, it turned out all to be true. It was all true. And we're still experiencing it today, right? Because why are we having super diarrhea when we eat lettuce from Taylor Farms? Well, it's because although technically farms are supposed to provide bathroom facilities and bathroom breaks to farm workers, in fact, they thought they could squeeze up their profit margins if they just didn't. And they just said, just hold it. And of course, nobody can just hold it. So you got farm workers squatting in the fields right beside the lettuce taking a dump because they can't wait they've been waiting for hours and they can't wait any longer and they have to go to the bathroom. If you tell people they can't go to the bathroom, well, they're going to do it anyway. And now they're doing it on the food because we wouldn't give them a toilet. So the conditions right now that are leading to the spread of this disease that's giving people this diarrhea are really the same category of problem as was happening in the early 20th century that Upton Sinclair's writing about, that Teddy Roosevelt passed laws about, and so forth. This is the banausic thing. Why not treat people as an abstraction, as units of production? Why not be frustrated with their human needs and deny them their human, because there's no place for it on your spreadsheet. So, well, we can't have that. Every moment that you take to take a sip of water or to go to the bathroom, you're stealing our profits from us. So we're just going to ban it. You can't drink, you can't poop, you can't pee. And then we think that that's going to work because on our spreadsheet it works because the Banausos lives in the land of theory. This is the danger of letting Banausoy govern, right? So, but his point is this is like an alien thing. These giant machines of the economy, of the legal system that we generate that make us feel like we're trapped in a Kafkaesque nightmare. We may, as moderns, want to imagine that this came from the outside, that this is some alien invasion that is inflicting this against our will on human beings, destroying what's most human among us. He says, but the weird thing, what he's trying to say in these opening paragraphs is, the weird thing is that all of this inhumanity is at the core of human nature. We have two basal metabolic functions in the metabolism of the human mind, and one of them is very humanizing. driven by need and appetite and feelings. And the other is inherently dehumanizing. The same thing that lets me cut a tree with a saw. That function of the mind I'm using when I can see, look at the Swiss, the world is a big cuckoo clock. Everything is there to be manipulated and adjusted. Hannah Arendt talks about this in The Human Condition. The whole book is about this. What happens when you treat the world the way Banalsoi treat things? It's fascinating. So anyway, he's saying that the point is this inhumanity is in us. It is among the most human. It is one of the two most human parts of us. Having a heart is one thing. Having a mind is another. And having a mind is scary. It means that you can treat things the way you imagine them instead of the way that they are. And the result is a kind of inhumanity. So he continues, how can the root of our rootless, inhuman order still be man? Instead of vacuous, a priori, intellectualizing ex nihilo, this present argument, this paper that we're going through, looks to the chemistry and metabolism of human nature in concreto. And when he says nature, this is a key word, right? He's using the Greek term, and it's equivalent to the Greek term ethos, character. Human nature is human character. What is it that's in us that drives us to unfold and behave the way that we do? He's saying, rather than theorizing in general about why are all these bad things happening, he's saying, in this paper, I'm going to look into human character and see what is it in us that makes us want to act this way, to do these terrible things to each other. Where does that come from inside of us? And if we understand that, then we can start to make plans about what would we do about it. So, what specific kinds of creatures are we obscurely determined to be? And how are we thus inwardly bound to live and think and see? This is based on the Greek idea that your character it's the unconscious part of you. And it's not just like a basement you forgot about that has stuff that if you went down there, you'd find things that were lost. He says it's more like fountains of order. It's a bunch of things that want to express themselves in the same way that an acorn is not an oak tree, but it wants to express the desire to grow in the direction of an oak tree, which is why, lots of acorns get eaten or they fall in the wrong place. But when they find the right conditions, they always try to grow into oak trees. It's in their character. It's in their nature, that part inside them that wants to transform into something new. And the thing it wants to transform into is always, singing a siren song inside that organism, trying to pull it in those directions. So he's saying he wants to look into human character. What is in us singing its siren song, trying to make us transform and become something? What is that exactly? Who are we trying to become? And when he spells this out like this, when he adds after the colon this whole bit, what specific kinds of creatures are we obscurely determined to be, and how are we thus inwardly bound to live and think and see? All he's doing is spelling out the meaning of the key word human nature. Right? He's trying to be, for a man who uses a highly technical vocabulary, he nevertheless also tries to be considerate of his audience. He is trying to remind us that when he says human nature, he doesn't mean what politicians mean. He means this specific Greek existential philosophical idea that we have a character inside us. And it is because Ginny's character is different from my character that she goes for a career in acting. And I went for a career in medical software. And we were drawn in different. We could say we're drawn in different directions, but the truth is we reached in different directions because something in us needed to express itself, and the things that are in us were slightly different. And so they expressed themselves in different directions, and we ended up following different paths. And it's the same for everybody on this call. The Greek take is that invisible part of you is nudging you all the time. It's nudging your conscious mind. It's nudging your ego and your will. Go this way, go this way, go this way, like a rider on a horse. Intervening Christian and modern epochs have purged not just the insights, but also the very vocabulary in which the Greeks framed the issue of human nature. Right? So human nature in pop culture could mean anything. Human, how rigorous are we being when we talk about human nature? Are we just saying, oh, it's just human nature, boys will be boys? Are we saying human nature is whatever the politician is trying to make a point on in his stump speech, so you'll elect him? I mean, we in modern world, we use words to mean whatever we feel like in the moment, and thus literally, as the dictionary tells us, literally often means figuratively. There is no word in English that literally means literally and does not at any time mean figuratively. Modern English lacks the capacity to express the idea succinctly that something is literally true, that we're not exaggerating, that we're not, we can't, that's not what English is for. English is for selling things, right? 5 cents, good deal. Best product, high quality, natural. We're just the language of salesmen, as a number of people have critiqued it. But in classical Greek, there are terms that mean exactly what they mean and that talk about these core issues of human nature and its structure and what is the relationship between our character and our culture, and where does our species, how do these things relate to us as a species and how we fit into the world. The Greeks have a huge arsenal of words that are very precise and specific to talk about these things that we don't have. And so this is a point that he's making in this sentence. He uses a technical vocabulary full of keywords because it's the only way to pin down these issues that in modern English can only be expressed in arm wavy and murky kinds of ways. And it's not just Greek that has capacities that are missing from English. Even German has amazing capacities for precision that are missing from English, which is why when you read a translation of Hegel into English, it's like on the edge of gibberish. It's half understandable and half not understandable because he's using very technical German terms that mean precise things. But in English, we're just throwing words like idea and notion, which are terrible translations of the Greek originals. The sentences frequently make no sense at all in English. We don't have the words. And so he's saying in this paper, in part, he's going to be using words in a precise way. And in part, he's saying he's going to introduce vocabulary to us, like douloi, benausoi, aristoi, that have precise definitions so that we can get a handle on these issues. Because as long as we just try to talk with the everyday, popular, modern English, it's all going to be murky. We're going to be using words that we don't have words to, for example, to distinguish the experiential side of the mind from the formalizing, abstractivizing side of the mind. German does, Greek does, but modern English does not. We have words like pensive or consider. They're emotive. They're sort of poetic words. We're very good at poetry. Before I call on Aria, let me do the last sentence. We have to revert to a concrete sense of the gestalten, or material forms, by which human personality is bound. And the specific ceilings on what individuals are capable of seeing and caring about and ordering their lives in terms of. So what he's saying there is, this is again a reframing of what he said when he referred to human nature. He's explicating what Aristotle explained in the Politics and in Nicomachean Ethics. He's saying, if you don't know somebody's character, then you don't know whether it's safe to leave your children with them or not. I mean, are they trustworthy or are they a child molester? You should care what somebody's character is, because if they have the character of a child molester, you should not put your child in their care. And so you need to be able to talk about character in precise ways. And the Greeks and the Germans can do it, and modern English people can't. We just get arm wavy and scapegoaty and angry when our ways of making decisions backfire on us over and over. And he's saying that's not enough. This was a presentation he did, I think, to the Dallas Philosophers Group decades ago. And part of what he's saying is in this paper, he's saying he's going to introduce to this group a bunch of terminology specifically so that we have ways to talk about these problems that are more precise than modern English gives us. Because if we don't have that precision, then we're not able to distinguish between a safe, childcare worker versus a child molester. They're sort of the same because we're all equal, right? Everything gets mushy and blurry and overlappy in modern English, and we need help from another language to help sort these things out. And so that's why he's going to use the language the way he does in the following paper. So this is the paragraph in question, and there are 3 big issues we're going to bring up today. But first, let's go to questions. Ari, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, okay. I think I'll come out swinging a little bit. But I'll try to put some puzzles together. And I'm really curious, like, if I could get Kenneth on the phone, I'd ask him these questions. If he's agreeing with what I'm saying, disagreeing with what I'm saying, or even saying what I'm saying, but doing it implicitly. Because I feel like he's putting a bunch of breadcrumbs out and I'm trying to create a path. And I have a feeling it's like that thing that art does, good art does, is where people who are viewing the art see something that the original artist didn't intend, but it's not wrong. It's something good, and everybody does this, right? Everybody sees their own. So the point is like this: I heard to some degree characterization of English as a salesman's language. It's very used for these sort of two aspects of function, and it sort of represents a certain aspect of the American culture. But I was also thinking how you then said it's like a romantic language, and I was thinking like Shakespeare is a perfect example of it when English is maybe its arete of a romantic language, right? And but you see English doing a lot of this kind of interesting. And I was wondering if the universal between English, which might actually be a Banausic thing, is English sounds like it's more of a performative language, a presentational language. It's not, it's about exteriors and what things look like or feel like, this emotive stuff, but it doesn't have as much depth to get some consistency or coherence. It's thin descriptions more than thick descriptions in some ways, and that would make sense if it's borrowing from lots of different languages. But I was also wondering if you take that as just, you know, a box of tools, but it doesn't mean anything yet, and you put those box of tools into the Banausic, um, profession. This Banausic, like a plumber, he comes with his box of tools and he comes to your house and he does certain things, right? So he's got the salesman stuff, he's got the romantic stuff. And this is Banausic trying to gamify, almost like a consultant would do for a company. And to some degree, a consultant could do it well if he's also like an Aristoi. He can actually look at what's there, but he can also gamify and systematize things. But I'm thinking like the true Banausic guy that we're describing is like a very good match for what English provides. And I can't tell, and I'm pretty sure it's some problem of the chicken and the egg. Is the language cultivating a type of culture because it's like the fertilizer that grows this type of plant, and therefore the Banausic language causes a Banausic culture? Or is it also the other version of this, which makes a lot of sense, is Banausic people are going to start just using the words that would be for their Banausic uses. Those ones get popularized. Those become the standard of language. And now you have Banausic language being prevalent because Banausic people were the ones using the language. And I feel like this is not different than what we talk about with the golden age of Latin versus the silver age of Latin, that the language itself decays. And I'm wondering then, just rather than being so simple with English as calling it these things, taking more of an Alistair McIntyre approach, which is also what sounds like Kenneth is saying, which is this Banausic category of people has been committing essentially war against the eristic categories. And you could almost make that as like from the beginning as like a Marxist claim, like this systematizers, we're just going to try and get rid of the people who have power based on this category, as opposed to whether they're actually good rulers or not. And you see a lot of this in modern revolutionary sort of political thinking, is there's a category and you've got a box. And if you're not in the box, you don't make it. I think that's the trap of the Banausic thinking. But if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like Kenneth and a lot of philosophers are really saying that the problem of the modern era is often a Banausic one. It's very much the Banausic have taken over. And I think Alistair McIntyre is famous for quoting it like this. He says it's not that the barbarians are at the gates, it's that they've been ruling us for some time. And he says it's based on this emotive problem that we don't remember what real virtue is. So I use the language, it's like an Alzheimer's patient who knows that there's a king, but somehow thinks that, the person who runs their let's say geriatric center very badly, and is not, and doesn't remember what the real world is like, thinks that guy's the king, right? You can use the same word in the wrong way. And it seems like we're doing that a lot. And somehow English gets in trouble with that. I feel like that's what's happening with English. And I can't tell if it's a bug or a feature, because I feel like that's part of the romantic ability, as to take a word like Juliet is the sun and you can make that word mean everything. That is not a bad thing, right? But that is also I feel like the con of the Banausic, that once they've got you believing that the sun is everything, now it's much easier to sell you the sun, right? So, but then you go back to, I'll probably nicely, hopefully end with, then you get back to Stephen's question, that really it's arrogant to think of humans as the center of everything. And I think it's better to look at like an ecosystem dynamic. And then that claim, if there's an ecosystem that has a niche for something like an Aristoi, that the environment is going to cultivate its own Aristoi somewhere. It's going to find another place to get that function of the environment satisfied. And so maybe, yes, it'll take a long time, or there might be some environmental collapse. There's a lot of nasty, messy things that happen in between. But I think it's a solid argument that if the Banausic, or whatever you want to call it, without systematizing it, whatever the forces at will that are sort of keeping down an arrestic sort of function in human nature, that is like, I feel like Jurassic Park. It's like life is going to find a way somewhere else, right? And humans in this case will be the dinosaurs, where you can't lift up their skirts to check if they're all girls, right? You can't look up everybody's skirt and see if they're all Banausic, right? There's an arrestic one that's going to pop up somewhere somehow. Ironically, I guess that's a weird argument in reverse for like, if Hitler and Stalin showed up and they're unpredictable, and you know that happens, unpredictable things happen predictably, that there's going to be something unpredictable that's going to be predictably happening in the somewhat near future. But it will be unpredictable. But we can predict that it's going to be unpredictable, right? So I think that's a nice place to end. Okay.
Yeah. Now you're paraphrasing Heraclitus, who said, "Expect the unexpected."
Yeah.
And he's not wrong, and neither are you, right? I mean,
No.
this is one of the things
Yeah.
Hannah Arendt talks about in The Human Condition. She says, we modern historians may love the idea that history is predictable, but she says it's only predictable by default. Every single new person brings a surprise into the world. She says, natality is a kind of miracle. The child has not signed any social contracts, has not agreed to participate in all your propaganda. And you might get some of it into their heads, but you're not going to get all of it into their heads. You don't know what they're going to do when they grow up. And she says some people see that as a threat, and they do everything in their power to try to leash the kids and force them to be indoctrinated to the maximum level possible. She says, but for her, it's a promise. It means that no matter how bad things get, at any time, somebody can be born who goes, "This sucks, let's change it," and might figure out how to do it, because people are full of surprises. So on the one hand, that. On the other hand, your point about the feedback loop is right on. Why would modern English be so Banausified? Well, for two reasons. And one is Banausoi, who gained power in the modern world because money became the currency for everything. No longer did we have God, no longer did we have nature. It was just money. And once money became the thing that could buy anything, then they had enough power to begin shaping everything, including the language, to be about buying and selling and so forth. But as you point out, once the language has been changed to be Banausified, the new generation grows up learning a Banausified language. They're more likely to think in Banausic terms. And so you got a feedback loop going. The Banausoi shape the language creates more Banausoi, or shapes Banausoi, or shapes people who are not Banausoi to be tolerant or even accepting of the Banausic value system. I'm put in mind of Oscar Wilde, what you said, because Kenneth loves Oscar Wilde. And Oscar Wilde is the one who has the famous quote about the man who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. And this is Oscar Wilde. This is not just Oscar Wilde making an offhand witty comment, although man, can he deliver a witty comment. But it's also him skewering the entire modern personality. Says the problem with the Banausos is that they do know the price of everything. What does it take to acquire this? If I sell it, what do I get for it? But doesn't understand at all what any of it means. It's all just a numbers game, and they're completely missing the fact that what they're buying and selling are people, or rivers, or things that matter, that have meaning, that can't be quantified. That's an invisible dimension of experience to the Banausos, and so they create a world that tramples that dimension of meaning, because how can they respect a thing they can't even perceive? So feedback loops. There's feedback loops all over this. It's all biological systems, of course, and ecosystems, like you suggested. It's good stuff, Ari. Thank you. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Okay, I might have brought it up last week, but something that grabbed my attention, Rudolf Steiner pointed it out. Yeah, well, you go back to the Dark Ages, and in a sense, the Catholic Church was simply carrying on the work of Rome, and that was the war on the spirit. You look at the Romans, the pragmatic versus, say, the Greek. There is that element there, isn't there? In the Dark Ages, the Western Church decided that the highest faculty of an individual is the intellect. And the Eastern Church differed. The Eastern Church believed that there were spiritual qualities in the individual, significant spiritual qualities in the individual. The Rome wanted to squash that idea because the arbiter of spirit is the Pope. He's the one that decides what spirit is. You, the individual, are to obey in terms of spirit. Your other concerns, meeting the needs of the flesh, pursuing wealth, well, that's corrupt human nature. We accept that. But the spirit, we don't want you thinking too much about values, because you start coming up with all sorts of crazy things. And this continues. And even when the church has died, well, Karl Marx is an example. He's continuing on the work of Rome. That in the end, he's rejected the spirit. So your Aristos are the people that pursue intrinsic values. For them, truth might have an intrinsic value. The Benousai thinks, can I eat it? What good is truth unless it serves my ambitions? So the Benousai is a sophist. So this is where it comes from. You're talking about the war on the Aristos. It's a war on the spirit in terms of contemplating what are intrinsic values. Now, you see your friend, Mr. N. Nietzsche, he brings up the question of values, doesn't he? So, where is the contemplation of values in the modern world? I mean, intrinsic values, not utilitarian values. How do I get something? So this is it. The highest faculty in man is the intellect. And you look at Western culture, and it's done very well with that being the highest value. This is how they built their empires, their trade empires around the world, was pursuing the needs of the intellect, but not really going further. So the spirit box was left a bit empty. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a nice summation of about 2,000 years of history in a nutshell. And it goes right to what Ari was talking about. Yeah, there is this hidden dimension of values and spirituality for which there's no place on the spreadsheet. Now, brands, if I want to brand myself as having values, I'm the values company. Or if I want to brand myself as having spirituality, I'm the biggest church. Come join me and I'll take you to God. Well, then that has a place on a spreadsheet. Brands have value. And by value, we mean they have a price. They can be bought and sold for a certain amount of money. But actual intrinsic value, as Stephen points out, there is no place on the spreadsheet for that. Anything that doesn't translate into cash doesn't exist from the perspective of the modern world. You look at a forest, and if you see something that's growing and alive that's been there for 1,000 years, the modern world considers you an idiot. What you're supposed to see is so many board feet of timber, or how many sales of annual park passes or visitors passes can you sell? to not cut it down today. There's a cash value associated with it, and that's considered the only real value. It displaces the concept of values per se. It certainly displaces the concept of spirituality. So everything Stephen's saying is just, it goes right to the point that Kenneth is making in this paragraph. So let's dive in to the material and see what we've got here. We've done the intro. I spent a few days doing a deep dive, and I've got a number of sources here, and I'll just let you know, other than this essay and the other writings by Kenneth, the actual sources that I'm going to be building on in these couple of weeks. One of them is Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. She has some really great stuff in there. One of them is Aristotle's Politics, and I've alluded to that already a bit. But Hannah Arendt quoted Aristotle's Politics and quoted as something that, you ever have that feeling where you've read a book like a dozen times and you thought you understood it, and then somebody else quotes a line from it and you go, what? No, he doesn't say that, does he? And then you go and read the book and the line's right there and it's been there all 12 times you've read it, and somehow you were thinking about something else all 12 times when you read the book. You're like, I didn't even know this was there. This is going to come up this week and next week and the week after as I talk about Stephen's question, because Aristotle replies directly to Stephen, and I didn't see it coming until I heard Hannah Arendt mention it in the course of making one of her own arguments, and I had to press stop. I do these as audiobooks while I'm doing the dishes or cooking, and I had to press stop and back it up and play it a few more times and go, wow, is she right? Did he really say that? In fact, I lost a meal on the stove while I went back and opened up a copy of the Politics to go double check, and no, she was right. So that's in there. And then I started Googling, and I found a 1936 article by Robert Schlafer. It's called Greek Theories of Slavery from Homer to Aristotle. And he's got some really interesting stuff in there. He quotes Homer, he quotes Plato, and by extension Socrates. He quotes Aristotle, and talks about how the idea of what a slave is, what does it mean to be a slave? Do you have to have a slavish personality, or could you just be a normal person who's unlucky and got captured by slavers? All of that stuff. He talks about how the concept of slavery and politics changed over the centuries from Homer to Aristotle. It's really interesting reading. So Moringa. So that's a Moringa. Good. Thank you. So this is the material I'm drawing off of. You feel free to read it at your leisure. It'll take a few weeks to get through, but I think it's going to be worth it. Let's dive in. Our first discussion is about the way that modernity confuses objectivity and actuality. So let's set this up as a little dialectic. Objectivity versus actuality. And actuality is one of Kenneth Smith's keywords. It's one of his most important terms. Kenneth distinguishes between reality and actuality. And we're going to talk about that. And then he uses that distinction to critique the Banausic worldview, because Banausoid claimed to be objective. Banausoid claim that they see things the way they really are, and that they talk about things the way they really are, and that people who are not Banausoi, and they don't self-identify as Banausoi, but they call themselves other things. But the in-group that they think of themselves as part of, they think those other people over there are all irrational, and that our group is the only rational ones. The core to the modern value system, if it can be called that, is the idea that rationality is good and irrationality is bad. Rationality leads to law and order and understanding, and irrationality leads to chaos and crime and, crying in front of your friends and being made fun of. I mean, the things that we don't like to admit, that it makes you vulnerable to be irrational, and so you have to be rigidly rational. This idea that we're going to sanctify rationality and say only good things come from rationality. Certainly holocausts don't come from rationality. They certainly weren't among the first users of IBM computers. Those numbers they tattooed on the arms of the Jews, that was just a coincidence. Those weren't numbers for entering their cards into their filing system and into the computer. No, that sounds rational. And as we know, rationality can never do anything wrong. It must have just been hate. They must have just been angry people. And, anger is scary. Nobody should ever feel anger. So we do these warping things when we look at reality and try to impose our modern interpretive framework on it. And core to that is the idea that to be rational is to be true, is to be objective, is to be good. And to be irrational is to be false, is to be emotional, is to be chaotic and lead to the downfall of civilization. And this is why men who are, I don't believe this, but this is the underlying argument. Men are more rational than women, which is why men should rule everything. Women are all emotional, and that's why they should let men decide what women should do. And that's the way things are. They shouldn't worry their pretty little heads about politics. And this was I know, right, Jenny? But for the majority of the modern world, that is exactly how politics worked. Remember, the modern world goes back to like the 1400s, 1500s. I mean, women only got the vote recently. And that's because the modern world fully bought into this objectivity is good and subjectivity is bad. I think the fact that many women are not emotionally incompetent, that many women actually know what they're feeling from one moment to the next, and can figure out what you're feeling and can take that into account is part of what terrified men. And it's like, oh, these people must not vote. It's like they're touching the dangerous third rail of irrationality. Therefore, everything they say is suspect, and we can't trust them. As though that's not an emotional response. But anyway, there's a whole pile of equations happening on the objective side of the ledger to make it seem like it belongs on a pedestal. And there's another corresponding set of condemnations on the other side of the ledger that makes it seem like irrationality is a bad thing. And all of this is code words. This is code words. Objectivity is a code word for the kind of thinking Aristoi do. Subjectivity is a code word for the kind of thinking that Douloi do. And to the Banausos, there are only two character types, Aristoi and Douloi. They don't use these words. They use other words, but they amount to two categories: the irrational category of people who Aristoi believed deserve to be ruled, and the rational category of the people who deserve to be in charge and make all the money and win all the prizes and have all the cool Blue Angels and jet planes and so forth. We just had Seafair here. Seattle has a festival every year, and as part of Seafair, they have the Blue Angels fly over the city over and over and do precision flying. It's all very cool, except I worked at the VA hospital for 19 years. And let me tell you, the psych ward on the 7th floor, full of PTSD traumatized veterans, do not appreciate the fact that the Blue Angels fly right level with the 7th floor as part of their migration, as their navigation path to turn back towards Lake Washington, where they're going to do their aerobatics. We used to have a lot of trauma every year. So I feel differently about the Blue Angels than a lot of Seattleites. Anyway, who gets to have the cool toys? The objective people, the winners, the ones who are rational. This whole value system is built right into the structure of the law. It's built into the structure of politics and the economy. Non compos mentis. Remember that phrase from law? Are you capable of making a rational decision? Or are you one of those irrational people? Anyone who studied the history of women's rights in the United States and mental hospitals in the United States can't help but notice the overlap. When women would start to say things like, I don't know if my drunkard husband should control our wallet. Maybe I, who am not drunk all the time, should have a say in our budget. And the man would then take her to court and say, obviously she's insane. And the judge would agree, and she'd be locked up. In the early 20th century, mental hospitals were full of perfectly sane women who stood up to men, which was, obviously a sign of being crazy. And the point of this is objectivity versus subjectivity sound like they mean one thing to us in abstracto, but when we see how they're actually applied, they're used as justification. Why shouldn't we? Jefferson actually says this. Why shouldn't we steal these continents from the Native Americans? After all, they're not rational. Only rational people should be allowed to own land. And we're rational. And the way we know we're rational is we say so. And the way we know they're irrational is we said so. So, that was the extent of Jefferson's argument. If they had put the land under cultivation to make a profit like any rational person would do, then maybe they'd have an argument that it's their land. But they didn't. So we're going to take it from them so that we can make a profit off the land, as any rational person would do. And therefore, we deserve to own the land, and they don't. I swear to God, that is actually the argument. You can look it up. Jefferson makes it. Plenty of other people have made it in his day. In his day, they didn't feel ashamed of saying these things. So they would flat out say what the reasoning is that underpins a lot of our systems in a way that today we sort of hide it because we're ashamed of it. We kind of want to cover it up and make it seem like it's about something else. Objectivity versus subjectivity. This is a huge, loaded scale of values in the modern world. And it's in everything. Every politician who gets tough on crime, I'm here to make you safe. He's saying he's the rational one. He's saying all those dark-skinned, irrational people, you can't trust them. But you can tell by my white skin that I'm rational and I will protect you. The way I'll protect you is with the police. Right? That's how you protect people, is you send in a militarized police force. This, you think you're talking about one thing, but actually you're talking about something else on an unconscious level. And this goes on all the time in the modern world. Everything is going through layers of unconscious translation. And people who run think tanks or PR firms, they specialize in understanding what these words connect to down inside your unconscious. They make focus groups. They do scientific studies to figure out, if I say these words, how do people respond emotionally? Do they get afraid? Do they feel trusting? Are they more or less likely to buy this product or vote for me? It's a study of the unspoken part of the argument. And how not to say, oh no, dark-skinned people are taking over America and we won't be able to have our way with them anymore. You can't come out and say that anymore, but you can say crime is terrible, immigration is terrible. We have to do something about it. We have to have a rational response. We have to have order and law. All the stuff that I'm saying is talking about layers of interpretation. And I talk about this because well, I'm going to call on Ari in a second, but let's dig into the next piece. Objectivity and actuality. The Banausic value system confuses the term because they believe to be rational not only is to tell the truth, but if anything, it's even better than telling the truth, because you're telling the way the truth ought to be. The world ought to work according to the land of theory. I have a PhD in whatever I have a PhD in. I've mastered all these technical disciplines and this technical vocabulary. When I look at the world, I see it a certain way. And really, what's the point of all that if I can't actually impose that view on the world? I'm so sure that I'm right that I'm going to change the world to match the way that I think that it is. Now, you might think that sounds crazy, but in the origins of totalitarianism, and again in Between Past and Future, and again in the Human Condition, Hannah Arendt talks about the weird paradoxes. And I'm going to sing one of Stephen's favorite songs. I'm going to talk about a problem both with Stalinism and with Nazism. And neither wing of quote unquote of politics gets free of this. The Nazis believed that white people are superior, and that people who aren't white are inferior. And in order to prove that, they said this is the course of history is determined by the race of the people involved. We believe that with all our hearts, said the Nazis. It is natural evolution for white people to rise to the top. So on the one hand, race is part of the laws of nature, and it is a huge superpower, like God's omnipotence. It's just making history turn out so that white people get everything and dark-skinned people don't get anything. And that's just the way it is. But at the exact same time that it's omnipotent, it's also fragile and delicate and falling to pieces. And if white people don't rush in to save it, it's all going to fail, and then the black people will be in charge and everything will be ruined. So on the one hand, it's all powerful, and on the other hand, it's fragile and needs our help. And they believe both things at the exact same time, and they never questioned them. And so they say, for example, they say the Jews are so decadent and backwards because of their race that they can't accomplish anything and they're holding Germany back. Arendt talks about this. But at the exact same time, they're so successful that they own everything. They're the bankers and everything belongs to them, and they secretly run the world. They're both weak and all powerful at the same time. And so in order to prove how weak they are, we have to attack them and take everything that they have, and then we'll have it, and that will prove that racism is true. You think about the knots you have to tie your head into to say, on the one hand, it solves itself. This is the truth of the world. And on the other hand, it isn't the truth of the world, but it should be, and I have to intervene to make it the truth of the world. It needs my help to succeed, even though it doesn't need my help, and that's the way the world has always worked. There's a contradiction, right? Because what they've done is equate two things that cannot possibly be the same. But because they're devoted to that logic, they then have to change the world to bring it into alignment with the ideology. In other words, when they say that this is how history works, according to the laws of race, an unconscious part of them knows that that's not true, And they translate that into, so we have to intervene to make it true, and then we'll be right once we've made it true. She talks this through it in great length. She says she knows normal thinking people don't like to look at this part of the Nazi program because it doesn't make sense. But it does make sense. If you accept the logic of it, if you accept the ideology, then you have to intervene to do these things, because otherwise you'd be wrong. And ipso facto, you can't be wrong. Because there is a difference between having a theory and that theory being true. You have to intervene in the world to eliminate the evidence that it might not be true. She says, unless you think that that's just crazy talk, Stalin and his faction did exactly the same thing. They said they interrupted Lenin's 5-year plan, which Arendt says, curiously, all the documentation seems to suggest that his 5-year plan was working. Right, the czars were no Christmas dinner. I mean, it was horrible living under the czars, and a lot of the basic stuff in the first 5-year plan from Lenin is straightforward stuff like, what if everybody didn't starve all the time? What if we planted more crops? What if we increased our industrial capacity? It was pretty ordinary things that anybody might have put in place. But Stalin, when he got to power, immediately cut all that stuff off. He interrupted it, and Arendt says this is your first clue that Stalin and Lenin are not the same thing. Says Stalin undid everything Lenin did, including his constitution, including his 5-year plan, and killed off all of the main people who supported Lenin after Stalin came to power. It was basically a coup, and not unlike the sorts of things that the Nazis did to German politicians when the Nazis came to power. It says, but then the Stalinists had this twisted version of Marxism in which, and she acknowledges, twisted not in the sense that it couldn't have been drawn from Marx. Marx said some things that were open to interpretation, just like Darwin said some things that were open to interpretation. And Stalin could justly think that he was being true to the Marxist-Leninist theory at the exact same time that he sabotaged it. So it goes like this. You'll recognize the pattern. It goes like this. The future is communist because capitalists are a dying class. The bourgeoisie is a dying class. Their way of life is obsolete. And the future is the socialist revolution that will eventually, after socialism succeeds, will be able to abolish all classes, including the bourgeoisie, and move to a stateless society, i.e. communism, after which nobody will oppress anybody and there won't be any classes in charge. This is the argument. And because they're a dying class, they're weak. And we, on the other hand, are strong because we represent the future. And the future is socialism leading to communism. This is all straightforward enough. But then you get to the part that should ring a lot of bells after what we just said about the Nazis. And yet the dying classes are in our way, and they're so powerful. They're not only are they so weak that they're dying off, they're also so powerful that they're sabotaging the Russian Revolution. Everything that that we hold dear, our 5-year plans, our constitution, everything that we're working towards could be defeated because the dying class is so strong that apparently it's not dying at all. It's actually more like Superman. And then we have to ask ourselves if we're right about it being a dying class. But no, we don't ask ourselves. It may be simultaneously dying and also incredibly healthy at the same time. But because we believe it's a dying class, we have to kill them off. Once we kill them, they will be a dying class. And so, again, when you have a contradiction in your head between the theory and the reality, if you are an ideologue, if you're a totalitarian, the way that these two movements were, what you do is you set about fixing reality to make it comply with your theory. And so Stalin led purge after purge after purge, accusing everybody left, right, and center of being, a secret member of the bourgeoisie who is part of the dying class. And because they're a dying class, they have to die. By which we mean they wouldn't have died if I didn't intervene to kill them, which means they weren't a dying class in the first place. But let's not think about that too clearly. Just like let's not think about how the moribund, decrepit Jews also somehow own everything and are in charge of us, and they're the reason that we're poor. The contradiction in the head can be resolved logically through action. You act in the world to transform the world into the land of theory, and now your theory is logically consistent. And she says this thing is not a little detail. She says this is the very heart of a totalitarian movement. You teach people absolute fidelity to a ruthless logic dictated by an ideology. Everything must be made consistent. And if my explanation of reality is not consistent with reality itself, then we're going to fix reality to make it consistent. Now, she talks about this function. She talks about how anybody who says this is a left-wing thing, anybody who says this is a right-wing thing, they absolutely are not understanding what's happened here, because this transcends left and right. Totalitarianism is a whole different animal. It's like cancer. Is cancer a black thing or is it a white thing? Is it an Asian thing? Which thing is it? As long as you're asking which race gets cancer, you're asking the wrong question. Right? The thing has its own logic. Cancer can break out on anybody. And when it breaks out, it stops obeying the rules of your body and starts obeying the rules of cancer, starts doing what it does. And this is something like her model for totalitarianism. So the point of this is objectivity versus actuality. When an ultra-rationalist, a banausic person, says to be rational is to describe reality, they're engaging in the same kind of thought that Hitler was engaging in when he said, race determines the course of history, by which I mean it should determine the course of history. And if it doesn't, then we will change the world until it does determine the course of history. And that will prove that I was right in the first place. And it's exactly what Stalin does when he says, my model of the course of history is that there are these dying classes and they're going away and we're moving to a better world. But unfortunately, the dying classes are getting in our way because they're not dying so much. But we're still going to insist that they be dying classes. So that means in order to make it consistent, we will change the world to be consistent with our theory. And now our logic will be consistent. It's the same thing that a government planner does who is detached from, I'm not saying all government planners, but a hyper-intellectualized government planner who doesn't like science, doesn't like contrary evidence, who's hyper-focused on inflicting their theories that they learned in school on reality. They do the same thing with the relationship between objectivity and actuality. They say, I think rationally, that makes me objective. Because I'm objective, I see the truth. And that means when I describe my objective theories, I'm describing the truth. And if actuality doesn't conform to the truth, the problem isn't on my side because I'm objective by definition. The problem is on reality's side. So I have to intervene to change reality to conform to the theory that I've learned in school. And this is what happens when a hyper-intellectual leans into the banausic worldview so hard that they avoid all of the contrary evidence that would prove their ideology wrong. This is the kind of, so this thing about does objectivity come from rationality? And is objectivity a replacement for what's actually true? These are the questions Kenneth is asking here. And he's saying that the heart of this issue goes right to the way that the Banausoi see the world. And what we see in Stalin and Hitler and other movements like that is a reflection of the Banausic worldview. I have a consistent model of reality, and it's more important than reality. So I'm going to change reality to match it, and then I will be right. That's where abstractivism, hyper-abstractivism leads, according to Hegel, according to Arendt, according to Smith. All right, I know I've gone on for a while you've had your hand up. Come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to go back to something that talked about a while back a little bit, but this Banausic person or this Banausic type in the modern Banausic era, even talking about how the objective versus subjective almost sounds like a predator-prey relationship. There's a lot of what is it? Crime movies or like mob movies that are like this. It's like Eat or Be Eaten. One of my favorite is called Layer Cake, and it's like you're just trying to climb up higher on the layer cake, and essentially who is wolf to who. This kind of predatory hierarchical relationship that seems to be the claim that that's the world is like. But yeah, no, I had this idea that seemed a little bit paradoxical. Again, if the dualic person is in the flight of the moment, so to speak, and is trying to, I actually like my version of this is the modern mythology of this is zombies and robots. The Banausic person, the dualic person is the zombie, always craving what is immediately around and consumes everything, and is not able to have any executive functioning for planning. They're just always chasing after whatever they're looking for in the moment, and there's never enough of it. Then the other version of this, the extreme version of this, is the robot, and I'm thinking almost like a Doctor Who robot, like right. And but the thing about the robot or this person who wants power and how power corrupts absolutely, and wealth does something similar where they just chase after their wealth and they reduce people to things and they do really awful things to chase after those desires. Um, Again, that's usually phrased as still chasing an appetite. It's like, from an ecosystem's point of view, the Banausic person is not just to abstract as to air, but they're actually having a different type of meal, right? It's like they're only on dessert while like I don't even know how to categorize. It's not even eating food, right? It's like if the yeah, it's kind of like if the Dulic are at a wedding are all about having whatever best food is there imagined, is the Banausic person is like, I feel like trying to take a video or a picture and create the perfect scrapbook or wedding book of the event, and is always using their camera to craft like what page on what thing. They're in their mind abstracting this object that they're creating. Anyways, but again, the point is, and I don't know how Kenneth deals with this, or do we even need to, that it's a weird paradox that still at the end of the day, the Banausic person who's running the government and essentially lusting for power, that's a type of lusting. This is a type of loving their spreadsheets. And I see this a lot with weird things like fantasy sports is a perfect example of how people can get so excited about their roster and their things. And you're just like, wow, that is totally, and I guess it's not that different than sitting down and playing a board game with friends in certain ways. I mean, you are enjoying their company, but if it's usually about how good the game is. And there's something about making the world into games is very Banausic that reduces the complexity of things to just a set of rules and actions, and then can you out scheme the other players, right? So but the point that I want to get to is, again, the word that kept bringing me back, that I kept taking notes on, where I literally put down my hand and put it back up because I couldn't remember what I was going to talk about, because you were talking so eloquently for so long.
Sorry.
That no, it was lovely. That's why we're here. But the word that kept anchoring me back and forth is Banausic people are still appetite driven. It's just a different type of appetite. And it is an appetite that has to nullify the other appetites. It is true, you can have this appetite or that appetite. But at the end of the day, there's some weird, also like an appetite in the point of this. And I think that I'm sure this is where Kenneth wants to make these claims, is like these appetites of the Dulic, the appetites of the Banausic are also things that can never actually be satisfied. It's not like in other things. So I'll bring in a little neuroscience that's really scary and exciting at the same time. Is human beings have two general pathways that generate the most amount of dopamine, which is the most amount of motivation and excitement we get for something long term and short term. All across. The first one that really makes sense is anything related to mating behavior. We're willing to do a lot in order to find a partner and feel like we have a mate. This is like really motivating. Okay, fine. And there's a lot of good things and bad things we're willing to do about it. But the other one that he brings up, that's specifically just to throw away the first one, is the second one is anger. And the thing about anger, unlike if you eat food or go to sleep or do some other activity, at least temporarily, you get this sensation in your stomach that says, oh, I've eaten food. I don't want to kill 3 more deers. The deer that I've cured is enough for now, and I'll go kill some more later when I get hungry, right? Essentially, you have a physical reaction. But if you're somehow angry at the deer, there is no amount of deer that you can kill that would be like, oh, my anger is now satisfied. Like, yes, now I feel better. I had enough anger in my belly. Like, no. So this is the danger of anger. And this is also maybe like a Banausic thing of appetites, that sometimes these appetites have no off switch in a biological, weird, non-Sophrosyne way. Humans are built without this. If anything that's proof of a lack of Sophrosyne, it's this kind of weird mechanisms that humans have where we get reward from things like, maybe we were saying this earlier, from things that will literally be self-harming. And it's built into the hardware. And this is not a software problem, so to speak. This is a circuitry, like serious circuit loops of we get reward. And it's the primary way biologically, at least default wise, maybe you call it vestigial, and it's things we want to learn to regulate clearly. But anger is the natural one, that when things don't go well in certain ways, the brain's way to return certainty and motivation and excitement to the body and to the mind, whatever, to make it work, is to get angry. Like that really is a hot button. Nice metaphor for a reason, right? So, um, but I was thinking again, like this, I don't know if we address this or if we need to so much, is how much banausic people are really actually just another form of dualic in a certain weird way. If they're just appetite driven, but they're fulfilling some other stranger, not so simple of a form of an appetite that's doing weird things. That's what I want to pose it as.
Thank you, Ari. That's great. Yeah, it's one of the things that's clear is that the banausic character type is not, nobody is born, starting out with spreadsheets and calculations, right? Nobody begins as life as an accountant. We all begin as babies. We're full of feelings, we're full of drives, we're full of experiences, and that's the foundation on which everything else is built. So even all these hyper intellectual people who think that they're being objective, their objectivity, why are they thinking about this problem instead of some other problem? Why is their solution, quote unquote, to the problem take this form and not that form? It's driven by unconscious emotional impulses that they're not as aware of. I mean, to become a banausos, to become hyper intellectual, as Hegel points out, you have to negate the direct contact with what you're feeling and experiencing. You have to create an insulation, a layer within which you're not disrupted, by the flow of jarring, juicy experience. And that kind of monkish insulation of your brain, it cuts you off from feeling the feelings, but it doesn't cut the feelings off from happening. And so the emotions that are on the surface in a doulos go underground in a banausos, but they don't go away. It's just like you're saying, Ari. There is this huge emotive experiential content that's driving the banausic way of life, but that they would deny to their dying breath is driving them, because they believe they have liberated themselves from that shameful, irrational mode of existence that they have negated and pushed away from. They think they're free. And the last thing in the world that they want to hear is that they'll never be free of that. That will always be a part of them. It's always in there. All that they've done is make themselves blind to their own feelings and appetites. Because that's the one thing they hate more than anything is any accusation that they don't see the world the way it actually is. And if you say, well, you aren't even seeing yourself the way you actually are, nothing would infuriate them more than that. It is the ultimate diss when in fact you're just trying to tell the truth that they're still human. They still have all these human drives in them. They're not.
So I want to share something semi-personal without revealing anything, but I work with people, let's say on their sleep. And one of the things that I notice about we're trying to, let's say, rebuild their sleep hygiene or their routines, they'll often get into a certain mindset of, I found myself in this situation, or I didn't have enough time to this, or I ran out of time. Something very contingent, very then agentic, and every time I hear this, I can't help but thinking how there's a real problem with they have an expectation that they have complete freedom over their lives, yet they're behaving very slavish. And this mismatch is what I think is you're describing as an explicit form of how do you like they got to learn a little bit that they're sort of slaves to certain things that they don't want to be slaves to, but to call them a slave to their own whatevers is so damaging to their sense of self that you have to chip away at it somewhere else in other gentler sort of ways that eventually they can get to a point where like, oh yeah, maybe my free will is not quite as what I thought it was. And this is really hard. And it's interesting, it's like it reminds me of a schizophrenic person also with like a manic issue with dopamine, which is about prediction error. The bigger the prediction error actually is, so the more that they are thinking that they're free, but they're actually rather slavish, the greater that distance, the greater the confidence they have in their mental falseness. It's a really weird human problem as well, that the more you're living in crazy land, the more that you're certain crazy land is real. It's and I guess it also makes sense. Like, why would you be living in crazy land if you didn't think it was real? But I don't know. I just find it really troubling and hard that the more people actually distance themselves from reality, the harder it gets to actually come back to it. it's a very difficult thing. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to point out is the specificity of, it's kind of tragic that as people turn into Banausic people, it's like they're less likely to become heuristic people. I don't know if that's true. Actually, that'd be an interesting also part of Stephen's claim that actually their absence sort of creates a pressure somewhere. So, um, anyways,
So, yeah. Well, this is where it gets interesting, right? Because you've got
yeah,
choices about how to respond when you run into the problems with being Banausic. Yeah, Valerie quotes a great one. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passion and intensity. Yates put his finger right on this issue.
yeah, right.
But the point is, Aristoi don't develop directly out of duoloid. You can't possibly develop an heuristic character unless you went through the stage of developing a Banausic character. Or to put it another way, you may or may not have been Banausic, but the exact same faculty that the Banausoi lean on, you have to become proficient with. I mean, if you don't learn anything, if you don't ever go to school, if you don't ever master a trade, if you don't ever go through the experience of how to put your feelings on a leash, how to defer your rewards, how to suffer for a longer term goal, you're certainly never going to become an Aristos. You can't even become a Banausos. I mean, Banausoi work hard to become Banausoi. They develop a lot of skills and capabilities and self-discipline. There's downsides to it. We're not saying there aren't. It may not be sufficient, but it is necessary to become, if you're going to become an Aristos, to develop all those same skills. And the trick is, to become an Aristos, you also have to develop all the dualic side. You have to develop the gnosic side of your character, how to care about the facts that don't agree with your theories, how to rediscover when you're hungry, when you're afraid, and how to take responsibility for those feelings. How to discover the reality that there's parts inside of you that you're ashamed of, that don't satisfy your theories or your self-image, but they're there anyway, and you have to own them. They're part of you. If you don't own them, you're never going to figure out what to do about them. As long as you're in the land of denial, you can keep doing terrible things while insisting it's everybody else's fault. All of these things, these come from the fact that the Aristos has to be able to work both faculties and not just one of them. Because if you just work one, the whole world starts to make sense from the perspective of that one faculty, and it becomes a trap. So why do some people who develop the Banausic capabilities then go on to try to become heuristic? And why do other people just double down and try to deny, that there's any problem with them, that there's anything that they're missing? It's
Can I jump in and say one thing about this that I think is
Sure.
exactly what's this whole Hegel and Stevens kind of thing is, if these are points in maturity and some people get stuck in immaturity, or a system wants to make people certain weirdly develop, it's interesting how development happens, right? I want to talk about this, understand this from a developmental point of view of, well, maturity should try to find its way forward somewhere, right? But I like the step of this is like the fruit wants to be born from the bud and the blossom, right? So how's it there? It's an interesting way of looking at the puzzle from a biological sort of puzzle. I think it's interesting. So
It really is. Yeah. And it's one of those places where we run up against Aristotle's critique that, other animals and plants and organisms have sophrosune in them that's driving them to want to mature. The cheetah cub wants to become a grown-up cheetah. It looks at the grown-up cheetah and says, that is amazing. Someday I want to run like that. And, plays with its fumbling, falling down way. It plays with its fellow cubs. They trip over each other instead of running like the wind, but they're imagining running like the wind. And they're dreaming that if they keep trying, someday they too will run like the wind. There's something in them that yearns to develop. And we know that Homo sapiens lacks sophrosune, because we're not an animal that becomes a grown-up with a single culture where we all have the same way of life and with the same skills. That's what other animals do. We're the weird animal that could become many different animals. And so the only way that that was possible for us through evolution is to strip sophrosune out of us. We don't have a compass in the brain pointing to one way of life, saying that is the one thing all human beings should do. We should all fish. We should all be fishermen. We're not that animal. And the downside is enormous. And it's possible that this is part of why we can get lost in these stages of development in a way that other animals don't seem to do. But that's just speculation. The truth is we don't really know why it happens. We can see many of the factors that lead to it happening. Like we can see that, the more you lean into the dualic life, the more addictive it is. It feels good. You get immediate feedback, right? You're hungry, you cook a meal, you eat the food, you feel better. What a feedback loop. I mean, anybody who's ever cooked for themselves and sat down and had a very satisfying meal going, this was fantastic, understands the feedback loop and its power. You're tired and you're feeling depressed, and somebody reminds you, get up and breathe deeply for 10 seconds, and you do it and you go, wow, it's just 10 seconds and I feel better. And it's a drug like no other, that feedback loop. I can act to feel better. So you could imagine how someone could get stuck in that. And it's the same with the Banausic way of life. It's as Stephen points out in the comments, we because the modern world is dominated by Banausic, we often use Banausic as a pejorative. But the truth is we need that set of capabilities to develop the full mature adult form of the mind. We just need to not get addicted to them and stuck there and refuse to see the value of what we left behind when we pushed off against the dualic mode. We need to understand both modes are equally important to become proficient in, but you can't let either one of their siren songs suck you in to that side as the one source of truth. That it's built into the terminology of object. The word objectivity itself means you should be addicted to a hyper-intellectual life. You should hold your emotions in contempt and scorn. There's only one right way to live, and it is the distanced, abstract, educated, theorizing, logical, mathematical way. Everything else is wrong and false and the source of all evil. Everything bad that ever happened was because people didn't see the world the way I do. It's all hiding in the word objectivity at an unconscious level that we don't like to think about. And that's because the Banausic value system, such as it is, dominates the world today. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind. Sorry to keep you waiting.
You shouldn't be. I'll speak slowly and keep you waiting. I think we talk a lot about appetite here. And I think, should be clear that Banausic don't bring appetite to the table. That's not their contribution. I mean, they still have appetites, just like, but I would say like what we're trying to learn here in this character type is the douloi are appetitive. It's sort of a naive, whatever, what appetite, but what the Banausic can do is organize their appetites. How do we rank? It's like one of those hierarchy of needs or some they can create some fiction by which they organize them, and that helps them instrumentally, because they can think of, well, how can I get others to meet my appetite, to satisfy my appetites? How can I create organizations to satisfy my appetites? But at the top, it's always anchored by, this is what I want. It's not the heuristic adds to that. What should I want? That sophrosune. It's not that maybe the heuristic has appetites too. He wants to understand himself. He wants, he has desires. It's not that, gosh, at some point we drop appetitive behavior. We're still fairly motivated by wants, needs. And I wanted to have a little answer somewhat to Stephen, his original questions about, is there a little bit of heuristic in all of us? And I think I wouldn't say I think about that problem exactly in the terms that he does, but I have thought about it because I think about what a system of governance that's based on persuasion, not violence, requires what we commonly call in modernity the consent of the government. And that means if we're going to have an heuristic type government, well, the Banausoi and the Douloi have to consent. They have to have some heuristic recognition that, yeah, this would be a good thing. It's like my own career. I always liked it when I had a really good manager. It takes so much off of me, that I don't have to worry about the business or whatever. I can just do my Banausic computational whatever job and not think of other issues. But so I think I would answer sort of Stevens. Yes, maybe if what we want is a society based on persuasion, we have to have not just persuasive people, but we have to have, and that's more difficult, is to have people who can be persuaded, which we don't now. I mean, I'd say that's a real shortage. And I think to be persuaded, you would need some heuristic characteristics in all of us. You need, as my common example, it's not the philosopher king's going to be hard to find. There's a long line of people applying for that. It's the philosopher plumber that we'll have trouble finding. The person who can apply his instrumental thinking abilities to solving problems and recognize that other guy should be in charge and it's okay. Enough.
That's great, Donald. Thank you. It's only tangentially related to what you said, but you made me think about it. How dare you? One of the things that Hannah Arendt talks about extensively in The Human Condition, and she may not be thinking she's talking about Banausoi per se. She uses by the way, she does mention Douloi and Banausoi and Aristoi briefly in footnotes in that book. So I can see that this is part of where Kenneth got started as a young student on this stuff. But she talks about that part of the problem with having Banausoi, and I'm paraphrasing because she doesn't use the word this way. Part of the problem with having Banausoi run the world is that when you're a craftsman, the world, the things outside you are there for you to manipulate. They're the matter and you're the form. And so if you want things to be different, you make them different. And that when you conceive of politics not as a relationship of persuasion, but instead you think about it as wood to be forced to your will, it leads to atrocities. You start forcing people according to your will. You start treating people like they're water or stone or clay, and they're not. And they don't want to be treated that way. They have agency, and they're going to push back. They want to have their say. They want to persuade or be persuaded or both. Right? And if all you do is just say, "Screw you," wood can't talk back. Do what I say. Well, next thing you know, you've got an insurrection on your hands. And you can't figure out why. Well, these stupid peasants, I have a great plan. Just let me follow it. And if I can make a chair, then I can surely make a democracy. Just shut up, sit down, and let me tell you what to do. She says, you'd think that this problem is so obvious that nobody would make this mistake. Because, obviously people are not clay. You can't just mold them. And yet, when you read, she says, most of the major thinkers in Western politics in the modern age, you read their main political tracts where they explain the basis of the republic, the basis of the capitalism, the basis of this, that, or the other. And they almost always use metaphors of craftsmanship and making. Somehow, the obvious error of that approach keeps vanishing from their consciousness when it comes time to sit down and prescribe how the world's going to be. And she says it is, if anything, the most consistent reflexive twitch of modern political thinkers. And she says you even, and now going to Stephen's point, you even see it in Marx. There are places in Marx where he shifts from the usual mode of trying to, you know, cure the problems of human alienation.
Where's the decaf? I saw a bag that was not in there.
Oh, sorry, I think she hit off mute by accident. You see places in Marx where he slips and he loses track of his focus on alienation and rehumanizing the economy, and he just shifts into the mode of making, right? Because he's talking about the working class, and what does the working class do? They make things, they work, they labor, and you know, when you model human society as consisting of nothing but acts of making, it leads you to make the same slip up that all the other political thinkers are making. You start introducing what are fundamentally totalitarian ideas. We'll just reconstruct reality to satisfy our theories. He says, and this is a guy whose whole focus was on not doing that. And even he did it. This is how she says someone like Stalin later on thinks that they're being true to Marx. So they read those passages and not the early stuff about alienation, and then they conclude, oh, that history is mine to make, to create. So there's the ways in which the value system of craftsmanship and the market and the economist slip into our thinking at every level and change the way that we evaluate history, politics, religion, human one-on-one human relationships. Everything starts to become transactional because the market is transactional. It is so pervasive that it's easy to miss, because it becomes like the water that the fishes are swimming in. But it's also, it's an easy mistake to make, even when you think you have everything right. Even if you're focusing on not making that mistake, you can make it at the exact same time. That's how saturated we are in this idea that history and society are things that we make, which is a Banausic perspective. And so it does go back, Donald, to your point. Somebody has to be willing to be persuaded. If everybody's out there thinking, I'm the craftsman, no, I'm the craftsman, no, I'm the craftsman, well, then you get the modern world, right? Everybody's out there trying to impose their will on everybody else, whether through the vote or through, you know, tyranny. Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Hey, so yeah, how you doing? Yeah, one of the things that I've actually been looking at a lot of lately is skepticism. And you know, one of the things with skeptic philosophy, and one of that I've come to realize is that many times that they are looking at the world as what is something like onto, what is it like, versus what it is. And I think this distinctions kind of relate to when we're talking about a Banausic. You're saying what something is, and then you're shaping whatever it is. So that you start to look at things that, well, what would be beneficial, in this particular circumstances, and here are the foreseeable risks. But what is often not considered is the unforeseeable risks. And so it's not as if, coming back to the point, the idea of dualist and a Banausic, that it's not as if, you're right, you need to go through this Banausic stage where you're learning how to shape things, for sure. But with that, you still have to acknowledge limitations. And that's where really the problem then starts to emerge, is that there are no limits. And when there are no limits, then all of a sudden everything becomes, you look at it as nothing more than how can you use it. And that is not just matter, that's people. So one of the things that you brought up is this idea of reality and actuality. And another way also of framing is the potentiality and actuality. And then all of a sudden, what does the potential become? the potential starts to become everything is, well, you can become this. And it's like you're basically something, you're fitting, whether it be a person or some other even part of the ecosystem, which it could be nature, as into how it fits into this this I don't know, ecosystem that you created. And as you'd mentioned, is that when you look at it, if everything has an economic value and is only looked at from an economic perspective, then how dangerous that actually can then be. Everything becomes something to be exploited. So I think that this when you're talking about the distinctions between these two, is that when you transition to a Benasoi, is that it starts to be, you are saying what the world is like, and that comes from dogmatic belief system, or there can only be one, or this whole idea that this is the way the world works and I have a full understanding of that, and without recognizing limitations, then there's no wisdom, right? There's no constraints, there's no restraint. So anyway, I think that, and so my question actually would be, if coming off of that, is, where does Kenneth, come down with the idea of the skeptics? That how does he look at skeptic philosophy within, his writings? I mean, because he obviously looks at virtue ethics very closely. But just out of curiosity, as far as the epistemological approach, where does he fall?
It's complicated, right? Because on the one hand, if you don't have a skeptical impulse in you, you're just going to be a victim of every con job out there. And what is the modern world if not nested layers within layers within layers of con games? The whole thing is designed to extract profit from our pockets and to have us, work hard to put more profit in their pockets that we never had in our pockets in the first place. This is the structure of the economy. And so if you're not a skeptic, then you're going to miss all the con games that you're being conned by. But on the other hand, he says the problem with, for example, there were sophists in ancient Athens who prided themselves on their skepticism. I'm not talking about the cynics; that was a whole different thing. But the sophistic skeptics. He said the big problem with them is they were good at tearing things down, but they weren't any good at building things up. So you don't believe in this? Well, so you say this is corrupt. Okay, fine, but what should we do instead? And then there were no answers. And he says, he may not have answers for the modern world, but he is trying to identify what are the things that we're missing that could become the foundation for a better world. That somebody, some future people to come, if they put these pieces together in some correct way, if they're alive to what's happening around them and take it all into account, then they could do something wonderful, even though Kenneth says I'm living at a time when I'm not where I can see what those possibilities are. And so he spends a lot of time functioning as a skeptic, critiquing the modern world and what's wrong with it. But he also goes back to look at previous epochs to see what did they have that worked, that we threw out, that we should bring back. And what is there in the modern world that works, that we want to preserve, but just, put on steadier ground than it is right now. And this is why, for example, he says, noesis, the mental function that Benasea is based on, isn't evil. It's vital. We couldn't live without it. It's just out of balance. It's not supposed to be in charge. And neither is gnosis. Neither of them is supposed to be in charge. If they're in charge, then we're the slave, right? We're supposed to be in charge. And the way we get in charge is to say, I have two semi-unreliable counselors sitting on my shoulders. And they're my only source of information. So I absolutely have to listen to them, but I absolutely have to critique them and work them against each other and understand that there is a deeper truth out there. There's more goodness out there than they're going to tell me about. And I everything that I do has to be organized with the understanding that the truth is out there. So he would say, here are 14 people on this Zoom call. So we have the reality versus actuality. So we have 14 realities. Each of us has an interpretive framework that our mind projects, and it becomes not just a lens system, a mirror system for looking at the world. It becomes a bubble that reflects away some of the stuff we need to be able to see and distorts some of the things that it does let us see. And the result is that not one of these 14 realities corresponds to actuality. There is a mapping between them, and the mapping in some places has more fidelity and in other places has less. But we are the last people in the world who are qualified to testify as to which parts of what we believe are actual and which parts are merely real to us, even though they're not actual at all. So he went through a whole process before he did his Dramas of the Mind column, where he said he was reteaching himself how to think and how to talk, developing his keywords and saying, what are the distinctions that we need to be able to make to think intelligently about the world? And that's when he developed distinctions like reality versus actuality, and skepticism as a component of the philosophical life, but not as a replacement for it. And it's sort of the same thing he has to say about the Banausic way of life, noesis, right? It is a component of a whole-minded adult's perspective on the world. And it works best when it's a component and it's with its other components it was meant to be with. Because otherwise it's just full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Look at all my beautiful ideas. It's like, that's nice, but are any of them real? That's an
right.
irrational question. You have to go to actuality to find out if any of them are real.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, the idea of people thinking they have a map, like even if you had this kind of, again, this dogmatic religious belief system that you absolutely have the map of reality, or if, as Stephen was pointing out in his earlier comments, it's a overly abstracted intellectualization, where you feel like you have the map of reality. Either way, that's where it starts to be this absolutist approach. So even again, and even if you have a map, I think that the idea of restraint, whether just because you can do something doesn't mean you do it.
Right.
I mean, I think that that's probably the most important, part of ethics, in the sense that, when you're thinking about it in terms of, just think in terms of conflict, that just because you can press a button that would actually, harm a lot of people, doesn't mean you do it.
Right.
And so, that kind of restraint is something that you don't see, and you're seeing less of in things like, without, getting too far into the political aspect of things, but with like drone strikes and things like that. So everything is like, well, for the benefits are that this person is probably going to do something harmful, so it really pays to get rid of it. And it's like, well, you're not like, not everything is foreseeable,
right?
And that is the restraint that one needs to demonstrate within that framework, anyway. So
right, like
anyway,
Tolkien said. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, right? If they had killed Gollum, the quest would have failed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, what was it? The true act of courage is not to take a life, but knowing when to spare one.
Yeah, it's hard. These are really tough, because knowing whether it's the right thing or wrong thing to do requires omniscience, which we don't have.
Exactly.
And so it takes us back into the realm of how much can we make choices that are reversible.
Right.
Given the choice between an irreversible action that is either exactly the right thing to do or a horrible mistake, and I don't know which, or a reversible action that's somewhere in between, but at least I can undo it if I'm wrong. It behooves a mortal to choose the latter, because we are often wrong. But in some sense, we're always wrong, at least a little.
Right.
That pattern seeking function of the mind is what it's in all of us. It's active all the time. It leads us astray as often as it leads us to the right path. And it's what underlies the creepy feeling we get when we're watching a TV show or a movie and we finally catch up with somebody we haven't seen in a while. And in their apartment, they've got one of those walls full of pins and photographs and strings leading from here to there, and little written words like "I knew it" or "He's the one." And we think, oh, this guy has gone off his rocker. He's seeing patterns everywhere. And the reason it gives us the creeps isn't that we're afraid that, we might someday become like that. It's that we literally are that way right now. That is noesis in action. because we're
Right.
missing most of the picture. So all we've got is our weird little obsessions that we're interested in that we mistake for objectivity. We're like, I speak for the truth. Yeah, but you only ever studied chemistry. You don't know crap about psychology or sociology. You can't speak the whole truth if all you've got is chemistry. But what you can do is make yourself a little crazy, I've lost my mind board in which everything is connected by chemistry and chemistry alone. And what's on there isn't lies. It's not that there isn't chemistry everywhere. It's that there's also other things going on that have been excluded
Right.
from the picture. And that's what makes it unbalanced. And so, the creep factor is there is a piece of truth being told there that we don't want to know about or think about because we pride ourselves on being objective. In the modern world, if you're not objective, if you're not rational, well, jail, mental hospital, homeless, or dead. What are your options? Nobody
Or
wants
if you're not
those.
even, if you're not right,
Yeah,
meaning, and that's the other aspect of it. It's a very like, you have to be right all the
you have
time.
to be
or-
right.
And if you're not, then, heaven forbid. So
You
that's
have to be
another
the kid who
issue.
knows the answer in class, right? Who gets the A.
Right, right.
You don't want to be
exactly.
the kid who flunks. You don't want to be at the wrong end of the curve.
Yeah, the person that never stops talking.
But what's weird about it is this whole game of make believe where we all pretend to be objective. It's like you're in a world full of you think you're in a world full of vampires, and you're not. But you've put on a vampire mask and you've been playing as Bela Lugosi as hard as you can, and you're out there, giving it the thick Romanian, fake Romanian accent, and you think you're doing great, and suddenly somebody rips off the mask, and you're standing in a ballroom full of vampires, you think, and you're the only one who isn't. You're thinking, oh, fuck, I'm dead. There is this sense to which we are so committed to the performance of objectivity because we feel like our life as we know it depends on it. And we're not entirely wrong. Society will punish us for being openly subjective. But on the other hand, we're not actually objective. We're living a lie by pretending to be. And if we could acknowledge our subjectivity, it would put us in a better position to, understand when we're being moved by our feelings, as opposed to the hyper intellectual who's the one who yells, "I'm not mad." And he's the only guy in the room who doesn't know that he's angry.
That's
He
right.
literally can't feel it anymore.
That's awesome.
These are all
Thank
full
you.
of paradoxes, right? This is all really interesting stuff. And the fact that we get so invested in our performances that we really get enraged if people tell us the truth. If somebody were to walk, I mean, there's a reason they crucified Jesus. You start telling people the truth, and they're like, "Well, that's the crime beyond crimes. You're not allowed to do that." I speak for reality. I've been wearing the crown of reality all this time. I speak for reality. I'm objective, and if you suggest otherwise, I have all the rage as though I am the rightful king chosen by God, and you're committing a coup d'état, which puts you on the side of the devil. So screw you, buddy. All of our fighting impulses come up when in fact we never should have been wearing that crown to begin with. I don't speak for reality. Nobody here does. We
That's right.
can't. It's not our job.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
great stuff, Joe. Thank you. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Bringing up the question of racial apologetics, which is so popular at the moment. I have put across this warning before. An individual is not a race. The individual might have racial attributes, but they themselves are not a race, because a race is always invariably a group. Even Jesus saw this when he said 2 or 3 gathered in my name and I will be there. He didn't say one Christian on their own. So there is something there. If you look at the dominant culture, the inheritors of Rome, it really started with the Franks. Now, amidst the success stories, there's a lot of unsuccessful stories as well. This is it, Not every acorn is going to become an oak. Various German tribes went across the Roman border. You had the Goths, the Vandals, Suevi, all those other groups. They copied aspects of the Roman culture, but they're a little bit too superficial. So they were flash in the pan, spectacular century, but They vanished. The Franks were centuries of development. They did it more deeply. That's why they succeeded where the others got lost. So you might say that the Frankish Empire was the beginning of the New West. At the same time, we had the remnants of the Greco-Roman culture in the so-called Byzantine Empire. It was still there. But it ultimately wasn't going anywhere in the long run, whereas the Frank culture succeeded. But if you looked at it in the Dark Ages, you know, you're flying above the world. Remember the picture? And you said you look down at this region, you'd see brighter regions like China or Arabia or India, probably even Ethiopia. And you'd look and you know, look down, you know, there's these Saxons and Normans fighting each other. They look like they're having a mud wrestle. That's what they call a battle. This is the Dark Ages, and this is the what do you call it? The bud stage. You can't, you know, if you say in less than 1,000 years, these cultures will be dominating the world, you'd say that's crazy. So there is something you can't see. It flowers in the Middle Ages, and then the mature stage is reached when they spread across the world with their trade routes. But not every individual is a good example of the race. How many individuals are a good example of the ideal type? It doesn't matter. You don't have to be white to be a German. You just have to learn to speak German and understand the culture. And you might be a spectacular individual amid a whole load of not so successful white Germans. So that's the, you know, race is a group. It incorporates people, and it's, well, it loses people as well. But ultimately, even the race goes through a stage. So we start off with the Franks, the bud, the blossom, the fruit. Now we've entered the end phase, the wilting, according to Spengler. But of course, Imperial Rome was the winter of the Greco-Roman culture. That looked spectacular, it looked big, but the inequality which had created the Greco-Roman culture was fading away. But as far as the materialist is concerned, that's the best. That's the absolute, oh, look at the Colosseum. It's good stuff, yeah. They can still look good when they're fading away, but the inner fire has been lost. Now, with the case of the Nazis, they made that mistake as well. They think the race is the individual. So if we grab all people who have the correct characteristics and put them in a pot and stir, it'll work, but it doesn't work because they've made the same mistake. Whatever makes that group function is not easily perceived. You can't pigeonhole it. You can't put it in the letter A, B, and C. It's going to jump outside that. So you need to contemplate this, that a race is not an individual. An individual just has attributes. And you can fail as an individual, or you can be successful as an individual. Now, when it comes to a Banausa, I mean, John Cleese's Centurion was an excellent example. I mean, he's very efficient. He's smart. For example, when he tries to explain what Bigisticus is all about, and Pilate starts saying, I have a very good friend in Rome, he zips his mouth. That's smart. The other troops can't control themselves. When he sees the Latin language being written poorly, he's an expert, comes over and he corrects Brian. But you notice the bigger picture is actually lost on him. Even Pilate has an inkling of the bigger picture. He's supposedly the Aristos. He has an inkling of the bigger picture when he sees in Brian, look at the little rascal. Has spirit. Well, what's that, sir? Oh, yeah, I mean, a touch of bravado, daring do. It's that tendency to go beyond. He can see there's an heuristic quality in Brian. But it's lost on, as expert as John Cleese's Benousoi Centurion is, that to see further is actually lost. He's blind to the bigger picture, even though the smaller picture he's got down in pins. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That's actually a beautiful illustration of the limitations of the Banausic worldview. And you spend so much time in that scene laughing at the lisping diction of the emperor that it's easy to overlook that you're right. The emperor is the one who sees that there's more to Brian. He's not just a slave. He's got spirit. He's got a bravado, touch of doing do, and he's not wrong. It's the we're all so busy laughing at the scene we miss the point that he actually is seeing what the Banausic centurion is missing. That's an excellent point, Stephen. I've watched, I can't imagine how many dozens of times I've seen that film, and what you just said never occurred to me. So bless you. Thank you. It's very important. It's there's more going on than meets the eye.
It's a touch of the Aristos, even in Brian.
Yeah, even in Brian. Yes. Hey, Josh, welcome to the call. Come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I might be able to clarify a little bit here in trying to get some sort of a picture focused on Smith's work. It's a bit of a challenge for me because on the one hand, I'm going to have less of a familiarity with the more traditional philosophical approaches, say, pre-Enlightenment approaches that he draws from, including Aristotle. On the other hand, I have much greater familiarity with the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment or modern thinkers that he mentions, and they don't seem to be of much help to me here because I find that his reading of them, including Arendt, is not consistent with my understanding of the work. So he's doing something with them, but he's doing something which goes in a different direction. And so what I'm trying to grapple with, I want to bring this back down to a certain kind of cultural politics where I'm familiar with discourses that call themselves or are called anti-enlightenment or post-liberal. And it seems to me that there's two diametrically opposed ways that one could think about these. One would be a way that sort of embraces the Enlightenment as a kind of a background or foundation and then goes further in a certain sense. And that would include critical theory and hermeneutics, phenomenology, pragmatism, and even postmodern approaches. So they're sort of not so much anti-enlightenment or anti-liberal as they are kind of a post in the sense of really having a lot of close ties with those ways of thinking while transforming them. And they tend to be associated with thinking on the political left, I mean, loosely defined. And then there's a diametrically opposed group that call themselves anti-enlightenment or post-liberal, including figures like maybe J.D. Vance and people like that, that are hostile generally to any to Enlightenment thought and certainly to post-Enlightenment thinkers, and are much more closely to pre-Enlightenment ideas going back to the Greeks and medieval thinkers and such. And they tend to be, I think, embraced much more so by the right. And so I'm tending at this point to want to place Smith within, or his thinking, as something which is much more likely to be embraced by, say, the American right than by the left in any of its incarnations. I know that you live in Seattle. Seattle has a new mayor who's has sort of socialist leanings, and that seems to be a trend. We see that in New York with Donnie and some other places, and so I'm wondering if you yourself feel that a lot of this, the kinds of modes of thought that go into the support uh, for your new mayor, or something which is that you would resonate with Smith in arguing that it's going in the wrong direction. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Good question. So you're concerned about the left wing versus right wing, and which of those boxes Kenneth fits into, and who he would appeal to. And the problem with doing that is that the left wing versus right wing model of politics is inadequate to what we face in the modern world. The definitions of left and right are so fuzzy that today's quote unquote left wing, in recent speeches, for example, our president typified every member of the Democratic Party as being communists. So they're, equated with Marx. And it's ironic because many of their policies are to the right of Republican parties of policies of the 1960s. So is communism to the right of, say, Eisenhower? The left and right break down into contradictions because ultimately they don't mean anything. We want them to mean a lot. We've invested a lot of emotional hope in these brands that they're going to give us the answers we want. But the last time that left and right were absolutely coherent and clear was in the French Revolution, when there were two tennis courts, one on the left and one on the right. And the folks on the right wanted to preserve the monarchy, and the folks on the left wanted to abolish it. And that was a clear statement of goals and purposes. They had a standard that they were working according to and organizing themselves according to. But today, for example, the Democratic Party, just as an example, their platform is whatever they decide their platform is each time they have a convention. And the platform shifts around. So, for example, when the Clintons were elected, before the Clintons were elected, when the Clintons were putting their campaign together back in the 90s, one of the things that they did is they moved the Democratic Party platform to resemble the Republican Party platform. And it was a conscious strategy designed to
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I appreciate the difficulty of defining, and I agree with you that the nature of the criteria for the distinctions between left and right shift fairly frequently over the course of history. But that's why I think one can use a definition and maybe use it from apply it from philosophy that's more consistent over time, that is linked to a certain kind of a continuity or transformation that maintains a continuity. So you can so you can start with, say, with sort of Enlightenment thinkers of various sorts, Locke and Burke and such, and then you can show how with the advent of, say, German idealism, and then existentialism and other movements that emerge later, you can see how the kernel of the ways of thinking that emerge out of the Enlightenment are not simply rejected, but they are sort of transformed but also enriched. Whereas, and that's what I would call moving in the direction of the left, particularly when it comes to, at least from one point of view, a certain kind of a relativizing of truth. And so, since I precisely don't see that to any great extent in Smith's work, I'm seeing that it's not a fit between Smith and any real of these figures, starting with Hegel, except in the most superficial sense, or Arendt. because they would reject his hierarchies and his focus, a kind of aristocratic focus, precisely, and even his way of characterizing the value of truth or how he understands truth. So it seems to me an entire set of lineages, multiple generations, moving forward from the Enlightenment, as much as they differ from each other, I think could all be united in opposition to the direction that he's going in terms of the way that he's formulating truth. I could be wrong about this, but that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I think in that sense, not the political right, but more fundamentally the philosophical right, which these days I do think is much more closely associated with what's happening with kind of a new iteration of the right that calls itself populist. That where there is a more consistent sort of set of ideas, philosophical ideas, unites them much more so than I would say than 50 or 60 years ago. Thanks.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that the categories of left and right are important enough to you that you need to put Kenneth Smith into one of them, and you've taken the evidence that's available to you and used it to do that sorting in the most rational way that you can see, and the result is somewhat uncomfortable. It looks to you like he might be on the right, and then you wonder, what does that mean politically? Where does that stick him? What tradition is he part of? Which of the two teams is he fighting for? And is it inconsistent therefore with the people that you've put on the other team, the left wing team? But the problem with doing this is that politics and philosophy are more than zero dimensional problems. When we try to reduce everything to being either this team or that team, no matter how well we've argued it, we've essentially tried to reduce a universe full of dimensions of meaning into two tiny points, the right point and the wrong point. And when we line up the evidence to demonstrate that these two categories are correct, we do an enormous amount of violence to the actual reality in front of us. It actually illustrates the point that Kenneth's making here about the difference between reality and actuality, is that we're all smart people. Any of us can bend the evidence to fit the model that we have in our heads and make it seem to belong there and make it seem to be correct. But to put Kenneth in a right-wing box, first of all, he'd laugh and laugh and laugh. You should read his book about the Bush administration. He's in American politics. He's the right wing would kill him in a heartbeat. They hate him with a flaming passion because he goes after hypocrisy. And the Bush administration, the Reagan administration, these folks had an enormous amount of corruption, and he calls them out on all of it. Which is not a modern right-wing thing to do. But the problem is he also calls out the left. So he calls out the Clinton administration. He calls out the Obama administration. All the times when they tell you a bunch of promises that lead one way, and then in their behavior, the actual legislation they support, they go a completely different direction. And then they don't want you to notice that there's no connect the dots between the two. Kenneth criticizes them for that. And the problem is, if you see the world as being in two teams, the left team and the right team, then loyalty to one of the teams, or at least its professed ideals, would seem to be a central important characteristic. And since Kenneth doesn't play that game, what you're left with is that he neither fits in the left box nor the right box, which makes him an unperson. He doesn't go anywhere. And the interesting thing, though, is that, like you talked about aristocracy, the most important thing about understanding what Kenneth means by aristocracy is to go back to Aristotle's politics. And in Aristotle's politics, he says, people think that the political systems are divided between rule by the one, rule by the few, and rule by the many, three forms of politics, and that defines the available spectrum. But he says that's completely wrong. He says it's not that those distinctions aren't there, but who is ruling you is far more important than how many of them there are. Is the person ruling you Martin Luther King Jr., and he's trying to give human rights to everybody? because that's a whole lot different than being ruled by Hitler. Yeah, who's in charge and what they believe in and what they think governance consists of is far more important than whether there's one of them or a few of them or many of them. You can have an enormous mob of corrupt self-servers and call it a democracy, but it's still a worse form of government than being ruled by, at least briefly, one enlightened despot until the point where he dies, at which point the problems with enlightened despotism become abundantly clear. Aristotle says the real distinction is between people who understand what governing is and want to do it, who really are thinking about what are the problems that human beings actually have here and now, and how can we address them, versus, on the other hand, people who could care less what the real problems are. They either just want to act out their feelings and their emotions and their anger, and they want to kill the guys who they've been angry at for generations, or on the other hand, who have a bunch of theories they want to inflict on everybody, whether it works or not. And next thing you know, all the Jews have numbers tattooed on their arms because somebody had a theory about race. He says, this thing where you get people who are unfit to govern, but insist on being in charge, Aristotle's basically saying that is a much bigger deal than whether you have a few people in charge or many people in charge, because the many frequently do. I mean, Nazism was a very popular movement. An enormous number of Germans were on board with the Nazis, much as we don't want that to be true. He says, so Kenneth takes after Aristotle in thinking that he's not for rule of the few, he's not for rule of the one, and he's not for rule of the many. He's for rule of people who actually want to govern, whoever that may be. This is nowhere on the left and it's nowhere on the right. This is a non-modern concept of government. It doesn't fit in these boxes at all. Now, it's not to say you can't put them in any box you want to. You're free to do whatever you want. But if you look below the surface of little catchphrases like aristocracy, what you'll discover is that there's no modern form of government that we do that Kenneth would endorse. And one of the ways that you can see that is that many of the people who advocated for the Enlightenment, many of our very favorite political writers, kept slaves, invested in the slave trade. Darwin wrote a whole book about how women are inferior to men. When we talk about the Enlightenment, we scrub off the reality of who these people were to create this pretty ideal picture, because we love the picture so much. We love the brand so much. We love the idea that there was a time when everybody was rational and cared about goodness. But it requires lying to ourselves about who these people really were and what they were doing, like inventing the transatlantic slave trade. In one breath, they're writing manifestos about freedom and liberty, and in the next breath, they're capturing people and shipping them to their deaths or a lifetime of labor. And it's the same. Jefferson is a classic example. It's the same guy. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Meanwhile, I have a sex slave in my basement. Where Kenneth falls on politics is that we shouldn't lie about this stuff anymore. We shouldn't attach ourselves to empty brands, because what it does is it makes us complicit in the crimes of the people who advocated those brands. When we say, yeah, Jefferson, he was all good and true, we're saying it was fine that he kept slaves. It was fine that he raped his wife's half-sister over and over and over for decades. We're saying that's great, because at least he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and that's the part we care about. So you can put Kenneth wherever you want, but he doesn't fit in any of these boxes. He's a critique. He's a critic of the modern world. And he criticizes in a way that, sort of equally will offend people who are loyal to brands. But if you can get beyond brand loyalty, if you care about the truth and what have people actually done, what have they actually said, what you discover is that he will tend to highlight and support the best values to be found on the left and on the right, but in an honest mode, not a hypocritical branding mode. And, that may not be your experience, but, Donald and I and David, we've been reading him for, decades. And if you read enough of his stuff, you eventually come to understand that he's making these distinctions that move him outside of the simple categories. I understand if it troubles you. The first time I read Kenneth, it troubled the hell out of me. The way he uses language, it reminded me of things I did not like at all. I
Well,
used, go ahead.
I've never encountered an important philosopher to me who didn't trouble me. I like that. I like the challenge of seeing whether they can become familiar to me.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't. I mean, you say he's, doesn't fit any boxes. None of us fit into any boxes, and all of us fit into any boxes. And what that means is there's nobody now or ever who has simply extracted themselves from any larger social system of discourse. There's always a relation there, which is why we can find overlaps. And so the idea that that he's an anomaly with respect not to political figures but to philosophical figures, not to his critiques about the Clintons or people on the left, but to what does he mean by values and truth and relativism and
Yes.
objectivism. That's up my alley. I understand, and I'm able to, I like to deal with that, with those meanings in very sort of nuanced and multiple ways, and so and I try to to go very carefully when I when I encounter a new thinker.
Yes.
But some thinkers, end up reinventing the wheel, and they tend to develop cultish followings because it's in the nature of maybe really one of the only distinctions really between cultism and something which is not, and scholarship which isn't, is the sense that the particular person who is offering these ideas somehow has some sort of a proprietary ownership over the ideas that that have never quite been expressed anything like that way before. Whereas when you sort of immerse yourself into larger communities of scholarships, you say, well, yes, there's all kinds of remarkable newer ideas, but those newer ideas also, I mean, obviously Smith himself is going to accept that, which is why he's careful to insert himself into the larger history of ideas and referencing other scholars. He clearly doesn't think of himself as some sort of a space alien who's plopped down with with truth. So I recognize that.
Yes.
But
yes. And
but
in line with what you're saying, I don't want to cut you off. I just want to add something to what you're saying. You will see in his writing that he never points to himself as having a system that he wants people to believe. He's well aware of cults of personality. He spends his whole time pointing at other philosophers. He says, read Kafka, read Kierkegaard, look at this part from Arendt, look at this over here from Hegel, look at this passage from Marx. His background is as a philosophy professor. And the way that he writes is constantly pointing at other philosophers. And he's trying to get you to not use him as a cult figure. He's trying to get you to broaden your experience with philosophy and to look at the way that different philosophers relate to one another in exactly the way that you're talking about. If he were a cult figure, he'd be spending all his time talking about his beautiful system and how you should believe it and everybody else is wrong. And he absolutely doesn't do that. I mean, you won't see that anywhere in his writing. He's fairly self-effacing when it comes to that. The reason I talk about it the way I do is not because I'm part of the cult of Kenneth. God bless Kenneth. It's because I know the man. I'm actually friends with Kenneth. So's Donald and so's David. We've known him a long time, so we talk about him informally, not because we're trying to get you all to lower your barriers and believe all of the secret things that our cult believes. But he's just a guy that we know, and he writes this philosophical work. So what you're talking about doing, to really dig into it and explore the nuances of the value proposition, I wholeheartedly, endorse that. I think you should. And I think what you'll find might be similar to what I found, which is at first I was very put off by his stuff. And eventually I came to understand that he was using words in a different way. And the way that he was using words, once I understood that, the things he was saying actually fit into the tradition a whole lot better than it seemed to on the surface. But your experience may be different.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
So the whole reason we do these seminars is actually to do what you're talking about. We're here not to say, God bless Kenneth, let's all be Kennethites. We're trying to pick apart the text and say, what does he mean by these words? Why is he using this language the way that he is? And a lot of it stems from problems that other people have talked about countless times. But I think you'll find there's a lot of overlap with Arendt, more than it seems at first. I don't know. Have you read, Arendt wrote an essay in her 1968 edition of Between Past and Future. She added 2 essays, and one of them's called Truth and Politics. And Truth and Politics is her essay about the way that it's so easy to get confused about the different forms of truth that there are in the world, that large numbers of otherwise intelligent people, I'm definitely not talking about you here when talking about the confusion. I'm talking about her experience after she wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem. She says people can get confused about the difference between sort of mathematical, logical truths like the Pythagorean theorem on the one hand, versus political truth like who should be president on the other hand. And then she says, but the third category, which neither of those categories likes, is actual truth. Like, did or did not this rare butterfly land in my backyard on June 14th of this year? I was the only person there to witness it. You can't logically prove it, so it's not like the Pythagorean theorem. And it doesn't matter what anybody else says because they weren't there to see it. They can vote all they want. It doesn't affect whether the butterfly was actually there or not. And she says the problem that we have in the modern world is that we large numbers of otherwise intelligent people think that everything is up for a vote, that democracy solves all problems. And so if you have any disagreement, you should just have a vote. And I've run a lot of nonprofits in my time. And let me tell you, that reflex to vote on everything, I've watched it destroy organizations, where people start saying, it doesn't matter what's actually true. What matters is, do we all like it? Are we all on board with it? And it happens all the time. So there's a way in which Hannah Arendt, on the one hand, she's democratic and populist, because she's saying every new person who's born, their natality introduces a miracle into the world. They have an opportunity to see the world a new way and to take an action that nobody could have foreseen. And sometimes those actions absolutely throw off the course of history in ways that nobody can predict, much to the annoyance of historians who have very tidy theories of this causes that, which means the future will look like this. And then along comes Hitler and yanks everything off in an unexpected direction. And she says, it's horrible when Hitler does it, but it's wonderful when Gandhi or Martin Luther King does it. There are these moments that happen that are completely unpredictable, but absolutely real, because people introduce through their natality this unexpected element into the world. So on the one hand, you could call her a populist, because she says you never know who's going to be the person who steps up to fill the need at a moment in history and make things better. But on the other hand, you could also call her an elitist, because in her essay, Truth and Politics, she says, voting on everything there's things that it's useful to vote on and there's things that it's useless to vote on. But a lot of pro-democratic people think you should be able to vote on everything. And it's absolutely not true. Every different kind of problem has a different kind of solution. And if you're trying to solve a triangle, it really doesn't matter what the vote is. You need to know your math. And if you're trying to decide whether the sea levels are rising because of global warming, it doesn't matter if you're one of the Carolina states and you have a vote that says it's not rising. So there, we just voted. I mean, that actually happened, right? In the last 20 years, one of the Carolinas, the legislature voted to declare that the sea level is not rising. Well, they're losing coastline anyway, whether they voted on it or not, because reality doesn't care about the populist vote. But there's other situations like, what should we do as a people right now, where populism is exactly the right answer. So as we're reading Kenneth, what we're going to see is that same kind of modulation between modes of truth that Arendt has. I can't say he inherits it only from her, but he'll do that same thing where if you read one passage, he sounds like, an oligarchic asshole who's saying, God bless the few, the many suck. But then he'll turn around on the next thing and go after a corrupt few and say that the opinions of the many matter, and that a government that doesn't take into account everybody's needs is screwed and needs to be replaced. And so if you're trying to pin him down as which one is he, the answer you're going to get is pretty much like the answer people get with Arendt, which is, well, it depends. I mean, this is sort of the nature of existentialist philosophy, is that existentialists always put "it depends" ahead of any kind of prescription. You learn the technical stuff, you build up your understanding of the different models, but then when you're faced with the actual person in front of you or the actual situation in front of you, you privilege them ahead of your theories. You say my theories
Well,
can only take me so far.
What I see is maybe a difference here between him and Arendt in terms of truth, and you made the distinction between, factual truth and other kinds of truth. So, so for Arendt, let me back up a little bit. So, so she does talk about right. So in 1967 in her essay "Truth and Politics," she talks about that rational truth includes mathematical truths, scientific truths, philosophical truths, and logical necessities.
Right.
So that's one. Yeah. So that has, and she says that has a kind of a coercive quality because once they're understood, they don't depend on persuasion, opinion, or agreement.
They're
So a
rude.
timer can kill a mathematician, but he can't make the theorem false. But
Yeah.
she also argues that this kind of truth isn't naturally political. Philosophers and scientists deal with truths that, by their nature, stand outside the realm of human plurality and opinion. So, factual truth is a category which is politically fragile. So, factual truths are what happened, who did what, when, and where. Something occurred. So, like the French Revolution began in 1789, or Nixon ordered the Watergate cover-ups, et cetera, et cetera. So, factual truth depends on witnesses, records, testimony, institutions of memory. So it exists in a human world of plurality. So for Arendt, this kind of truth is political because politics takes place among people who must share a common world.
Were you reading something just now?
Yeah, I wrote some notes from, from earlier.
Nice,
Um,
nice. Carry on.
but so in her analysis of totalitarianism, she argues that ideology isn't just a false belief; it's a system that claims to explain everything through one principle. And I think you've been making that point too. I think
Yes.
so ideology is dangerous because it can override facts, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if we compare Arendt here with Smith, I mean, they do overlap about the idea that systems of thought can become self-sealing, right? That they shut themselves off from other avenues of evidence, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
their own assumptions become so dominant. All right, but then so this is where I am thinking that they differ. So Arendt isn't really for one thing, she's not anti-modern. She thinks modernity contains dangers, but she thinks certain modern achievements like plurality, political freedom, public debate are essential protections, whereas Smith is more sort of classical in his critique. That the foundational premises of modernity, including abstract freedom, individual will, technological domination, are the root problem. So Arendt would maybe push back because you say the problem isn't that modernity liberated human beings from traditional authority. The problem is that certain developments like mass society and bureaucratic domination destroy the conditions under which people can think and judge. So she's closer to kind of Republican humanism in her criticism of modernity than somebody closer to Burke in this sense, like maybe Smith is. So she's, like Smith, she's suspicious of abstract ideological systems, but she doesn't conclude that the cure is a return to pre-modern metaphysical order.
Neither does
So I
he.
don't know. So okay,
This is, I think, where
okay.
the confusion comes from. He's not a Hellenophile. He's not saying it would be better if we all went back to live in the Greek world. He's absolutely not. He will write at length about the evils of the ancient Greek world too. So the idea that he's a traditionalist who wants to just demodernize the world is understandable because he's criticizing modernity, and it's easy for us to feel attacked. But he's not saying that the solution is to go backwards. That would be the traditional reactionary position, and he's not taking that position. He's not saying there's some past utopia we need to return to. So that
was my concern because I've had discussions with people that in a sense they almost take kind of a monastic model of sort of these values that are already preset, and on the basis of those values, because again, following a certain trajectory that winds its way through medieval thought, those values determine the facts.
Yes.
And those values are eternal. And
Yes.
so, we need to get back to those values. And so you can see from that point of view, that really is a pre-modern point of view, because it's not going to be able to recognize any legitimate basis for a new, say, rationality or the neutrality of science, because it's going to be saying you're assuming that there is a neutral standing point when the standing point must be these eternal values. So that's
right.
what I wanted to make sure of. I wanted to make sure that, that he's not enamored of something like that.
He's not. It's that his position is I'm going to have to bring this part of the discussion to a close because we're almost out of time for today, and I want to give the people in line a chance to comment before the end, or rather after the. We're going to go a little over today, and I hope you return in future weeks so we can talk about this in more detail. But in a nutshell, where the core of the confusion is a confusion I had when I started reading him too, and it's this. It sure sounds like he's saying we should go backwards because he has a lot of negative things to say about the modern world, but the reason he's critiquing the modern world is it's our world, right? That the world is not plagued by being subject to Sparta. If the world were being plagued by being subject to Sparta, he'd be writing all these essays about what's wrong with the Greek world. But the Spartans aren't in charge. They're not the ones who need to be criticized. And likewise, we're not all being, tyrannized by Henry VIII right now, and who's claiming divine right of kings. If we were, he'd be writing essays about what's wrong with the concept of the divine right of kings and the various ways in which Henry VIII's behavior is somewhat less than divine. And anybody could see, the hypocrisy and the greed and the cruelty and so forth. And so he's critiquing modernity because of that. Not because modernity is the greatest evil the world's ever seen, not because modernity never did any good for anybody. He's not, I see Stephen's got his hand up. He's not like one of those members of the People's Popular Front in Monty Python and the Life of Brian who hate the Roman Empire with a flaming passion, except of course for all of the amazing things that the Romans did for them. But who cares about all that stuff? We still hate them. This isn't the kind of critique he's doing. The kind of critique he's doing is, we live now. These are the problems that we face. And the only way that we're going to find to go forward is if we understand those problems honestly. And to understand those problems honestly, we have to be willing to ask questions that make us uncomfortable. And among those questions are, just because modernity came later doesn't mean that previous modes of thought are obsolete. There may be a baby with the bathwater problem. Overthrowing the corrupt a Roman church, the monopoly that they had on spirituality at the end of the medieval period, it had to happen. He's certainly not saying let's all go back to the medieval church, but just because we did that doesn't mean that when we chucked out the idea of being under the thrall of a corrupt religion, at the time, I'm saying nothing about modern Catholicism, but medieval Catholicism at that particular period was pretty rotten. Everybody could see it. Just because that had to be gotten rid of doesn't mean we did it in a way that allowed us to keep everything that the medieval world got right. So saying each of these different epochs has things that it sees clearly that the other epochs don't see very well. And each epoch has characteristic mistakes that it makes that other epochs wouldn't have made. The worldview that predominated through Europe during those times caused people to have certain kinds of strengths and certain kinds of weaknesses. And his core argument about modernity is not that we're worse, but that we're like them. We have blind spots that we can't see. And the whole point of this book isn't to say, if only we could all be Greeks. It's to say, of all the things the Greeks got wrong, what are the things that the Greeks understood more clearly than we do that we could import into our worldview in order to find a better way to move forward from where we are? What are the things that Joan of Arc understood about her world that we don't understand anymore, that we could import into our worldview in order to see more clearly than we do now? And the resistance, of course, is to say, well, how dare you criticize our brand? Our brand is modern. Modern means we're up to date and they're not, and we're the best and they're obsolete. And to say otherwise, you must hate the modern world. But and I went through that with Kenneth, but it's not what he's saying. What he's saying is it's like the way there is no one correct human language that everybody should speak. There's things to learn from German. There's things to learn from Greek. There's things to learn from Spanish or Romanian. We want to get a broader understanding of the possible ways people have organized their lives in order to harvest the best qualities from all those epochs if we're ever going to make a new future together. Because if we don't, if we just stay within the assumptions of the modern world, then like Lenin, we might set out to overthrow capitalism and find that the country we've created in only a few decades becomes capitalistic. Exactly what we were trying not to do, we did, because Lenin shared so many assumptions with the rest of us that were unquestioned by him, that he couldn't perceive. It's the project of this book is to get us to try to understand, what do we take for granted that isn't true, but we think it is because we all believe it together. And if we can find what those things are, then we can keep the best qualities of the modern world while jettisoning the most broken parts. So it's a contra-modern project in the sense that it's defying modernity's claim to be perfect or to be practically perfect. And it's saying modernity has good qualities that we should preserve, and it has unfortunate qualities that we should get rid of. And we shouldn't buy into the idea that we're on the winning team and everybody else sucks, because that's how we stay trapped. I guess that would be a gross summation. But come back in future weeks, keep bringing these questions up. We'll examine them together. We can go through and see where he does and doesn't support various aspects of the modern world. I'm gonna let us go over it just a few minutes so that Ginny and Stephen can have their say. Ginny, come off. Actually, before I do, Donald, didn't you have your hand up at some point during this discussion?
I did, but I would say that this comes back to something that you do all right. We are fish. We are swimming in modernity. We can't see the water. We can't discover it. That's why Kenneth here is looking at other areas so that we can finally see what we're blinded to in modernity. I would say if Kenneth said anything about modern political movements of all types, is that none of them are philosophical in any real degree. They're not reflexive. They're not philosophical. It's all concerned with power, never truth, never the good. Enough.
Thanks, Donald. Ginny, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind. Oh, you still there, Ginny? You got to find your mute button. She may have stepped away. Okay, we'll come back to her. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff about using the term immoral in the text, or amoral, sorry, amoral. It's a bit of a question what the word means. Amoral means to lack a moral of any variety, either good or evil. I've had this argument with the rationalist of Melbourne. For him, the word moral invariably means goods. But philosophically, the word moral means good and evil. It means you have values which are good and evil, that you can choose between good and evil. As dear old Nietzsche said, why not be evil? You can choose to be good or evil. So it comes a question of how you use the word morality in the text. So are the Banausoi being immoral or amoral? And so this word has come up quite a lot, and it's not really been discussed. What the word moral means. Another thing is also discussing ideas purely in terms of what ideas can do for you. And I noticed that a lot of the discussion centers on this. This is quite Banausic, isn't it? Well, Marx is a perfect example, How can we change the world? Why bother understanding anything? All this philosophical nonsense about understanding stuff. I don't want to understand stuff. I want a revolution. I want action. I want it now. That was Marx's outlook. I don't want to I don't think there's anything to understand. I have my rigid positions about what I want, and when I get it, that's when I'll be happy. This is a question. The heuristic value is about understanding or seeing further without immediately going into what can this do for us? And this has been overlooked, when they discuss philosophy, or what's philosophy going to do for me? Well, it'll help you to see further. Oh, I don't want to see further. I just want stuff. There's some stuff over there. Give me a brand new car. That's all I want. I don't want to question anything. So it's this maybe, it's worth checking into the use of the word amoral and moral. Well, what are the moral issues? Because these are values, aren't they? We are talking about two sets of values, those values which are created to serve an outcome, or those values which are purely philosophic, which are just based on understanding for the sake of understanding. And another question about the course of the meetings is centrifugal and centripetal. See, if you endlessly pursuing enthusiasm is good, because without enthusiasm, your plane will never get off the ground. But an excess of enthusiasm, which becomes a centrifugal, means that your plane never comes back down. So, when we're following these meetings, it becomes a question, if there's too much centrifugal, we might have to think about the centripetal, reining the discussion back into the essential points. Okay, yeah, we'll have to look up morals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. And with that, we'll wrap up for today. I hope you all had a good time and found it illuminating.
And I think you may have called on me while I had to take a phone call. So anyway, what I wanted to say, Rick, is that what you said earlier about Stalin and Hitler, I read an article way back a few months ago that what Trump is doing is following Hitler's guidebook, basically, that he's, anyway, I just thought I would mention that. I don't know if you.
Thanks, Ginny.
It was just an article I read.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for the meeting today, Rick.
I'm glad you had a good time. I hope everybody else did too. We'll pick this up again next week for those who want to come back and explore more ideas together. Thanks for joining us, those who are new. Valerie, it's a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much, Rick. Highlight of my week.
Yay.
Yes, indeed.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.